The murky water trembled rhythmically beneath the pounding rain. Raindrops struck like tiny bullets, blasting ripples across the surface, overlapping and colliding beneath the cold light of the night. Distant streetlights cast blurred yellow streaks across the water, distorted by every wave. Beyond them, the background dissolved into vague silhouettes, perhaps buildings, perhaps an empty street, everything swallowed by damp fog and scattered light. The relentless sound of rain crashing down, water splashing in violent bursts, formed a frantic and tense rhythm. Small pebbles lay scattered across the road, occasionally nudged by the flowing water, like tiny details thickening the oppressive atmosphere. The downpour came violently, tearing through the night in dense curtains of rain slanting with the freezing wind. An old wooden sign swung from rusted iron chains, the word saloon appeared jagged and incomplete, as though time itself had gnawed away part of its memory. Every sway dragged out a dry creaking sound that echoed through the soaked air. The brick wall behind it was cracked and peeling, shattered windows exposing thick darkness within. Rotten wood, crooked doorframes, and shards of broken glass reflected the faint yellow glow from the narrow alley below. Far away, a few weak streetlights pierced through the rain, turning the street into a ghostly blur, half real and half dream. The wind lashed violently, slamming the sign back and forth. Splinters of wood snapped loose and flew into the storm, merging with the rain like fragments of torn memories. In the corner of the frame, piles of ruined objects, barrels, tables, chairs, lay abandoned, remnants of a place that had once been loud with life. The road was drenched, muddy stones jutting unevenly beneath the cloudy water. The rain poured down mercilessly, each heavy drop smashing into the ground and exploding into pale sprays. A hand lay motionless, its fingers slightly curled, as though trying to cling to something already lost. The wrinkled skin was coated in mud and rainwater, glimmering beneath a distant flash of lightning. A dark orange sleeve, torn and soaked, wrapped around the wrist like the final trace of someone who had endured something brutal. Lightning pierced straight through the dense rain, forming an eerie, almost surreal beam of light that cast shadows over the powerless hand. Every raindrop disturbed the surface of the water, making the image waver as if reality itself were trembling. Close to the ground, mud and water blended into a shattered mirror reflecting the furious sky. The rain fell endlessly, each drop like a heavy knock against the motionless body. Goku lay face down, his muscular body now covered in mud and wounds. His orange gi was shredded, clinging tightly to his skin like evidence of a battle that had only just ended. One arm trembled weakly, fingers clawing into the slippery ground, a final instinctive refusal to surrender. His black spiked hair, soaked and heavy now, drooped over part of his face. Lightning ripped across the sky behind him, a cold streak of light cutting through the storm, illuminating every drop of water running down his body, every wound, every scar, exposed in that single flash. His face tilted downward, nearly touching the muddy puddle beneath him. His eyes were half closed, uncertain whether from exhaustion or from struggling to preserve the last fragments of consciousness. Each breath seemed to merge with the rhythm of the rain, heavy and broken. Then feet touched the ground, not human feet. Pale white skin gleamed beneath the rain, long sharp toes tipped with deep purple nails like metal, sinking into the soft mud. Every step sent ripples outward, shattering the fragile silence that remained. Slender calves were encased in smooth biological armor marked with vivid purple plates, reflecting flashes of lightning from above. Rainwater slid along the alien surface without soaking in, rolling away as though the material did not belong to this world. Its mere presence alone made the atmosphere feel suffocatingly dense. The rain still fell, but now every drop seemed heavier, slower, as though time itself had become cautious. The storm hammered down relentlessly, each drop smashing into the muddy earth and making the puddles tremble as though they were breathing. Legs like forged metal, covered in scratched and weathered blue plating, moved slowly yet with terrifying force. Every motion of the joints carried the weight of a war machine. The instant those feet touched the ground, mud and water exploded outward under the crushing pressure. Rain streamed across the cold metallic surface, reflecting the dim light of the storm-darkened sky. The world blurred behind sheets of gray rain, emphasizing the horrifying presence of the creature advancing forward, slow, unstoppable, monstrous. The night was suddenly torn apart by a radiant purple beam, like lightning from another world. Amid the torrential rain, the muddy earth erupted violently as the energy struck, drilling deep into the ground with catastrophic force. The moment of impact exploded outward, mud, water, and debris spiraling into the air like a chaotic crown around the glowing epicenter. Purple light reflected across every raindrop, staining the entire scene with a cold and menacing hue. At the center, the earth split open like a bleeding wound still leaking energy. Steam rose and merged with smoke, forming a dense fog that concealed whatever had just awakened. The deep roar of the explosion, the violent blast of displaced water, and the shrill scream of lingering energy still echoed through the storm. From the heart of the impact, a towering column of white smoke erupted upward, twisting like the breath of a monster awakening beneath the earth. Mud, stone, and water were hurled skyward in massive black fragments, shattering apart before raining back down. Chunks of earth lifted from the ground, suspended for a brief instant before gravity dragged them back, creating a symphony of destruction and collision. The purple light had vanished, yet its aftermath remained, hidden within the thick smoke and the crater torn violently into the earth. Everything trembled, as though space itself had fallen out of rhythm. The power had descended, leaving behind a threatening silence before whatever came next. Goku collapsed forward again, pressed into the mud as though gravity itself wished to keep him there. His black hair, soaked and hanging limp, clung to his mud-streaked face and battered skin. Rainwater mixed with dirt streamed down his cheeks and dripped from his chin into the puddle below. His trembling hands gripped the ground desperately, fingers digging deep into the mud as though trying to hold onto the last remnants of strength. His orange guy, darkened by rain and stained with earth, clung tightly to his exhausted body. Every heavy breath caused his shoulders to shake faintly, as if he were fighting on the edge between collapse and survival. His gaze remained lowered, yet deep within it burned an ember that refused to die, a quiet resilience hidden beneath mud and freezing rain. Around him, the world blurred into gray sheets of water. Only the sound of rain, thick mud, and ragged breathing remained, echoing one undeniable truth: the battle was not over. It was a dead city, buried beneath endless cold rain, that coated everything in oppressive gloom. The ruins of shattered buildings stood silently like the skeletons of giants, witnessing destruction without a word. A heavy dark leather boot stepped down into a muddy puddle, sending ripples outward. Water splashed up, then dripped slowly from the sole like the ticking of time itself. The wet leather gleamed beneath the storm, tightly bound laces emphasizing a sense of cold discipline. Far away, lightning ripped across the sky again, illuminating the devastation in a single terrifying flash. In that instant, the figure wearing those boots appeared even more frightening, a person standing firm amid chaos, utterly unshaken. The rain poured mercilessly, freezing drops shattering against the ground beneath the blue-gray darkness. A powerful hand tightened around the hilt of a sword, its rough skin marked with scars and old calluses, telling the story of countless battles. Rainwater streamed through every finger joint and dripped onto the cold blade. The sword was not fully drawn, yet even the hilt alone carried the weight of death. Weak light reflected across the wet metal, flashing like lightning within the storm. Trunks stood within the tempest, where the boundary between life and death had become as fragile as the rain itself. Water slid across skin marked by wounds and dried blood, blending into streams of memories that had never truly faded. His light-colored hair clung wetly to his forehead, strands trembling in the wind. Lightning flashed behind him, carving sharp outlines into eyes filled not only with anger, but with ruthless determination forged through loss. His pupils narrowed as though locking onto a target beyond the frame. His lips parted slightly, teeth clenched, not a roar, but the silence before an explosion. His dark jacket clung heavily to his body, soaked by rain, emphasizing his unwavering stance. Behind him, lightning continued to tear through the sky like a reflection of the fury boiling within. Amid the ruined streets of a collapsed city, Gohan stood alone, motionless, yet carrying the weight of a storm within him. Rain battered his solid frame, streaming across defined muscles beneath a dark purple GI soaked through completely. Mud and water churned beneath his feet, reflecting white lightning tearing across the sky behind him. Both fists were clenched tightly at his sides, veins rising like taut steel cables. His posture was not defensive, it was waiting. Waiting for a single moment to unleash all the restrained power within him. His face tilted slightly downward, eyes staring upward beneath his brow with terrifying calm. Around him, ruined buildings stood silent like witnesses to a battle already fought, or one about to begin. There were no voices, only rain and distant thunder. Lightning flashed once more. In that instant, Gohan's shadow stretched across the flooded ground like something beyond human. A lone figure stood towering amid the ruins of a broken world. The rain never stopped, a white cape draped across his shoulders whipped violently in the wind, heavy folds soaked with rain snapping through the air like the banner of the last survivor. Beneath the cloak, a powerful body revealed itself through every subtle movement. His arms hung low at his sides, fists clenched silently with restrained power. Green skin glimmered beneath flashes of lightning, a warrior from another world standing among humanity's ruins like a god of judgment. The road ahead stretched long, muddy, and fractured, surrounded by collapsed buildings, the remains of a civilization that had failed. Only the sound of rain and wind screaming through broken concrete remained. Lightning flashed again, revealing the wrapped turban and the unshakable stance. He did not turn back. He did not hesitate. After the collapse, broken towers stood silently like tombstones for a dead age. Rain fell heavily, every drop smashing into the earth beneath flashes of lightning across the cold gray sky. At the center stood Android 17, lean but hardened, like a blade sharpened by solitude. His long black hair, soaked through, clung to his cheeks and partially shadowed his lowered gaze. Both hands lifted behind his neck, tightening the orange scarf slowly, a tiny motion carrying the weight of an unspoken vow. His black shirt clung tightly to his body, drenched by rain. Beneath it, white sleeves contrasted sharply like two halves of the same person, discipline and darkness. His belt sat tight around his waist, holsters resting silently at either side, not flashy, but always ready. His face held no anger, no rage, only cold stillness, the silence before everything collapses again. Lightning flashed behind him, outlining his body in icy white. Even the raindrops rolling across his skin carried weight. His long soaked hair hung in wet strands around his sharp features. Droplets gathered along his forehead, slid past the bridge of his nose, then fell from his chin like the slow counting of time. Cold light reflected in his bright eyes, giving his gaze a piercing calm that concealed something unreadable. Android 17 let the corner of his mouth rise into a faint smile, not entirely friendly, yet not openly threatening either. It was an expression balanced dangerously in between, impossible to decipher. His dark orange jacket, soaked by rain, clung tightly to his body, standing out sharply against the bleak darkness behind him. Silent yet tense, as though the very next second, something important, or dangerous, was about to happen. A ruined alley lay swallowed in darkness, where scorched walls and scattered bricks rested like the remains of a recent catastrophe. The air was thick with dust and heat, while flickering orange-yellow light reflected across filthy puddles beneath. At the center, an explosion erupted, not as a moment of chaos, but as an almost perfect image of destruction, a gigantic ring of fire opening like a blazing gateway. Flames spiraled outward, swelling into radiant clouds of heat, while sparks and debris blasted in every direction like fireworks from hell. Within that circle stood a lone figure, perfectly still. A solid black silhouette, its face obscured, yet its stance unwavering, feet planted firmly against the trembling ground. A long coat fluttered gently under the pressure of the shockwave, as though the figure itself were the center of the inferno. It erupted like a burning nightmare, fire consuming the background, raising towering walls of flame amid a collapsing city. Ash swirled thickly through the air, mixing with lightning tearing across the gray sky in the distance. At the center stood Vegeta in a strained stance, his entire body taut like a drawn wire. His upright hair whipped violently beneath the heat and invisible currents of energy, forming a savage halo around his head. His face was smeared with dirt and scars, yet his eyes burned with an almost insane determination. His mouth opened in a silent scream, an invisible roar that seemed capable of tearing through space itself. Veins bulged along his neck and temples, every muscle twitching as though resisting an immense force from within. His fists clenched tightly, trembling amid the sea of fire, as if he were forcing himself beyond his final limit. The flames reflected across his battle-damaged armor, highlighting every bent and scarred metal plate, the marks of countless battles. This was not merely a moment of combat, but a moment of transformation, when a person stands at the edge between control and eruption, between power and destruction. Night descended beneath freezing rain, every droplet tapping like drums heralding something catastrophic. At the center of the frame stood Cell, a distorted embodiment of power and annihilation. His wet skin reflected vivid purple light, as though his body glowed from within. His elongated face and bizarre structure were partially covered by green-speckled biological armor, creating the unsettling impression of something both organic and mechanical. Yet the most terrifying feature was his eyes, glowing with a sharp violet light, staring forward as though piercing through every defense. Then the smile appeared. Not a normal smile, but a grin stretched almost beyond reason, revealing rows of perfectly sharp white teeth. His mouth widened in a silent laugh that nevertheless seemed to echo across the storm, drowning out even the sound of the rain. Below, between his hands, a sphere of purple energy spiraled violently, radiant and alive, like a distorted star. Its light stained his face with an eerie glow that made every feature appear both vivid and warped. The space around him seemed to contract beneath that presence. This was no longer an ordinary moment, it was the instant before a horrifying power would be unleashed. A laugh, a gaze, and an energy sphere, all converging into one cold declaration: destruction was ready. Rain crashed down in thick sheets, every droplet piercing the air like freezing needles. Through the blue-gray darkness, a hand extended outward, its skin tinted an unnatural green, gleaming beneath the rain, muscles tensed as though channeling immense energy. The index and ring fingers stretched forward. At the fingertips, a point of light ignited, tiny at first, then rapidly spiraling outward into a radiant ring of green energy. It did not remain still, plasma currents twisted violently around its blazing core, releasing harsh light that cut through the rainstorm. Sound itself seemed strangled away, leaving only vibrations trembling through the air, as though reality were bending around that single point of energy. Tiny sparks burst from the vortex, reflecting across the raindrops and transforming them into thousands of glittering lights before vanishing. Through the dense curtain of rain, a colossal beam of brilliant green energy tore across the frame. It twisted violently like a dragon made of pure force, spiraling tightly around a blinding core. Steam rose from its surface and merged with the wet air, forming a dense mist around it. Green light reflected across the buildings, transforming the entire city into a terrifying painting. Everything seemed frozen in that instant, as this monstrous force cut across the sky, a battle beyond human understanding. An energy collision exploded like a star crushed in the heart of the city. The beams twisted and screamed before colliding, releasing a catastrophic shockwave. Fragments of light shattered outward like broken glass, tearing through the rain in thousands of chaotic streaks. The buildings behind became warped black silhouettes trembling beneath invisible pressure. The rain no longer fell, it was blown backward, dragged into the center of the explosion as though nature itself had bowed before this energy. Vegeta, his powerful body encased in a tight battlesuit, stood firm amid the ruins. Both hands stretched forward, palms open as though holding a miniature sun. From them erupted a radiant golden sphere of energy, its blinding light exploding into sharp sparks that tore through the night and stained the rain amber. His eyes remained focused and cold, locked onto the target ahead. Every raindrop evaporated the instant it touched the intense heat, forming a veil of mist around him. Behind him, the shattered remains of a ruined city lay silent, witnesses to the power now screaming into existence. This was the finishing blow. Vegeta planted his feet firmly against the soaked ground, every muscle rigid with strain. From both hands, a colossal stream of golden energy burst forward like a raging river of light. It did not merely illuminate, it burned, crushed, and erased everything in its path. Far away, the city's ruins exploded beneath the overwhelming force. Massive slabs of concrete were hurled skyward, swallowed by dense clouds of smoke and debris. Sparks scattered like meteor showers, blending into raindrops that instantly vaporized under the unimaginable heat. The very air trembled, as though the earth itself were groaning. A gigantic torrent of golden energy ripped through space, surging forward like the fury of the heavens crashing down upon the earth. White-blue lightning crackled violently around its blazing core, intertwining like whips of electricity and making the beam appear savage and uncontrollable. The moment it struck the ground, everything erupted. Roads shattered apart, earth and stone blasted into the air and swallowed by towering clouds of dust. Steam and smoke merged together, twisting through rain so intensely heated that it evaporated in midair. Golden light transformed the entire world into a blazing nightmare, every detail drowned in scorching brilliance where matter and energy blurred together. In the distance, ruined structures trembled like fading shadows on the verge of collapse. Rain poured down like silver wires slicing through space, drenching the scene in icy cold. Amid jagged stone and exploding water, Trunks hurled himself into motion, his body twisting sideways while both hands gripped a long sword, the steel flashing beneath the storm's dim light. Water exploded outward in white arcs as the blade swept through the rain. His face tightened with fierce concentration while cold light reflected across his soaked jacket. Trunks stood tall, feet rooted firmly as torrents of water surged around him. One arm lifted high, the sword pointed straight toward the heavens, as though summoning an unseen power. Lightning split the sky behind him, illuminating his sharp, focused face, eyes lowered, jaw clenched, body drawn tight like a bowstring, before releasing the decisive strike. His drenched black jacket clung tightly to him, reflecting flashes of lightning, while the water around him rose as though controlled by the force of his sword swing itself. Distant rocks blurred into rain and mist, creating a sense of isolation, as though this battlefield belonged only to him and the storm. Then a massive explosion tore open space itself, not as uncontrolled chaos, but imprisoned within a transparent dome of energy, swollen like a gigantic sphere, absorbing and suppressing the destruction trapped inside. Within the barrier, cold blue, blazing gold, and poisonous green merged into a raging sea of fire, swirling like an elemental storm. Debris slammed against the invisible shell and ricocheted backward, creating brief streaks of light before disappearing. Smoke and dust surged upward into dense black columns, compressed tightly within the confined space, as though the explosion itself were being suffocated by an unseen force. The explosion's light reflected across the wet streets in scattered glowing patches while the rain continued to fall, cold and indifferent to the catastrophe unfolding below. Destruction had reached its peak. Yet it was still not permitted to escape. Goku's face emerged sharply beneath the heavy rain. Water streamed across mud and scratches on his skin, forming glittering trails beneath flashes of lightning. His soaked hair hung heavily across his forehead and eyes. Those eyes glowed with an icy white brilliance, burning like supernatural flames within the darkness, piercing straight through the rain as though seeing beyond everything ahead. That light did not merely shine outward, it reflected the violent and uncontrollable energy raging within him. His face did not scream or explode with emotion. Instead, it held only crushing silence, jaw tightened, lips sealed, as though restraining a storm about to erupt. Every falling raindrop, every slow deep breath, created a suffocating stillness before the inevitable release of power. That gaze alone became a warning without words, something beyond human limits was awakening. Amid the damp ruins, Goku knelt low, his body coiled tight like a compressed spring, every muscle visible beneath the darkened orange gi soaked with mud and rain. Both hands cradled a swirling sphere of radiant blue energy. The orb did not remain still, it churned and roared, emitting razor-sharp streaks of light that made the surrounding air vibrate. Blue light reflected across his battered face, illuminating his focused eyes and unshakable will. His spiked hair remained sharp despite being drenched. Raindrops striking the energy sphere instantly evaporated into thin mist. Behind him, the battlefield dissolved into darkness and rain, leaving only thunder and pounding heartbeats. The moment felt silent, yet unbearably tense, the still point before the decisive strike, when all power gathered within his palms, ready to erupt into light that would tear the night apart. Gohan, the young warrior, stood firmly with knees bent low, as though channeling every ounce of strength into a single explosive moment. His black hair stood sharply upward, his face tense beneath a cold focused stare, both hands extended forward, holding a brilliant sphere of blue energy. Lightning-like currents spiraled around it like dragons of light, creating an aura both beautiful and terrifying. The blue glow illuminated his body, revealing every defined muscle beneath his rain-soaked dark purple gi. Around him, the ruined city blurred into obscurity. The moment felt like the silence before a storm, a single second before the energy would be unleashed, before everything ahead of him would be swallowed by destruction. Then the final eruption came. Gohan tensed violently, muscles straining beneath his dark purple gi, his face twisting with a roar filled with raw power. From his clasped hands burst a blinding torrent of blue-white energy, surging forward like an unstoppable flood of light, a storm of power twisting, roaring, and tearing apart the rain and the very air around it. That violent light devoured everything ahead of it, reflecting across the rain-soaked pavement in shimmering streaks, as though the entire alley were trembling before a power beyond human limits. Raindrops were blown away, distorted into white mist spiraling along the current of energy. Gohan stood firm like a pillar, unleashing all of his power in a single fate-defining moment. Frieza's pale skin glimmered with an icy hue, like living stone cracking beneath invisible pressure. Rainwater streamed across his skin, mixing with thin fractures like the cracks of an ancient statue, creating a terrifying image. His eyes widened to their limit, pupils shrinking tight, revealing tiny red veins like fractures born from panic. That look was not merely fear, it was the instant of realizing the unavoidable, when a force beyond control was rushing toward him. Blue light flickered across his face with every pulse of energy, twisting his expression into something even more distorted and tense. Every wrinkle on his forehead, every twitching facial muscle, every trembling drop of water revealed pure terror etched into his features. Even the villain had become afraid. Cell's eyes widened so far, they seemed ready to burst, reflecting the violent light rushing toward him. His pale green, speckled skin, already cracked and damaged, was now scorched by the radiance, every detail slowly dissolving within the energy wave. His mouth hung open in a silent scream, exposing his teeth in utter horror. It was no longer anger or arrogance, but pure primal instinct in the face of unavoidable destruction. The beam surged straight into him, dragging rainbow-like distortions in its wake as though space itself were refracting and warping around it. Everything was swallowed whole, leaving only a fragile boundary between existence and oblivion. A colossal sphere of light erupted in the center of the city, so white it nearly consumed all color, like a second sun crashing down upon the earth. The ruined buildings appeared like charred skeletons, steel frames twisted and broken apart. The ground was buried beneath shattered stone and warped metal, everything blasted away by overwhelming pressure. Towers of dust and smoke spiraled upward, pushed back by the expanding shockwave erupting from the center of the explosion. White light spread outward into a gigantic dome, swallowing the horizon and reflecting across every surface like an apocalyptic halo. Space trembled, the air itself tore apart, and every sound seemed consumed within that blinding instant. Far away, the few surviving buildings stood unsteadily like silent witnesses before the wave of destruction reached them. The explosion finally ended, and dawn pierced through thick clouds, shining down upon a city crushed by catastrophe. Pale golden light fell in long rays through the dust suspended in the air, creating a beauty both majestic and mournful. On both sides of the scene stood the skeletal remains of unfinished or destroyed buildings, collapsed pillars, and exposed steel jutting outward like broken bones. At the center stretched a flooded road whose surface reflected sunlight like shattered glass, scattered with twisted metal and cracked concrete. Thin mist rose from the damp earth and merged into the air, making the entire world seem to breathe heavily. On the horizon, a mountain of debris blocked the sunlight like a final mark over everything that once existed beyond it. The sun hung low across the horizon, radiating a fierce golden light that seemed to burn through space itself. Atop a gigantic pile of ruins stood 5 figures in a line, silent yet carrying immense weight. They appeared like shadows carved into the light, each with a distinct silhouette. One wearing a long cloak fluttering in the wind, another standing upright with sharply spiked hair, another carrying a weapon across his back. Even through posture alone, their determination and readiness to face whatever awaited ahead could be felt. Beneath them stretched an ocean of ruins, twisted metal, shattered concrete, fragments of a fallen world. Thin dust swirled through the air, blurring the boundary between earth and sky and making the scene feel like a ruined dream. A battle was about to begin, one where the fate of the world could be decided in the very next moment. Goku and his allies stood like monuments surviving the apocalypse. The setting sun before them transformed the sky into a blazing sea of golden-orange light, swallowing every detail and leaving behind only sharp, powerful silhouettes. At the center stood Goku with his iconic spiked hair, firm as a pillar, hands clenched, shoulders broad, radiating the presence of a leader. Beside him stood companions of different forms and spirits, Gohan with calm strength, Vegeta compact yet hardened within his armor, Piccolo with his long cape flowing in the wind, and future Trunks carrying a sword upon his back. Together, they formed a perfect balance of strength, experience, and resolve. Below them, the city stretched like an unhealed wound, buildings torn apart, skeletal concrete frames exposed, dust lingering like smoke after battle. Heat waves rose from the rubble, making the air tremble, and the world appeared distorted, as though reality itself had not yet recovered from the collision that changed everything. The scene carried the weight of unity and destiny. Through their stances and the way they faced the light, it became clear. These were not merely survivors, they were the ones about to rewrite the fate of the world. From high above, the view swept across a city reduced to ruin, collapsed buildings, black smoke rising in columns like bleeding wounds. The gray sky hung heavy overhead, suffocating the light and drowning the world in cold gloom. Majin Buu floated in the air, his pale pink body muscular as though sculpted from living stone. He did not fly in any ordinary way, he simply hovered there, motionless yet crushing in presence, as though the very air obeyed him. His head extended upward into a curved tentacle, while strange holes dotted his skin. His glowing red eyes looked down upon the world with absolute coldness, not anger, not urgency, but the certainty of one who held power over life and death. Both fists were clenched, muscles taut as though restraining an explosion of power. Below him stretched the ruined city to the horizon, no sign of life remained, only dust, dying fires, and shattered structures. Thin smoke spiraled around his body, as though his mere presence distorted space itself. Majin Buu towered amid the ruins without moving, yet still made the surrounding world feel suffocating. He stood there with arms hanging low but fists clenched, his gaze tilted toward the distant horizon, cold and emotionless, as though deciding whether the rest of this world deserved to continue existing. He did not need to roar or flaunt his power. His silence itself was the greatest threat. Behind him, the city had become only the shadow of what it once was, ruined buildings, fires smoldering among the wreckage, black smoke merging into the sky. Flickering flames reflected across his body, creating shifting streaks of light, as though destruction itself honored his existence. Majin Buu descended into the ruined city, where torn buildings and rolling smoke consumed the darkened sky. He stood at the center of the explosion. The flames behind him erupted violently, forming a blazing halo that hurled debris and shattered stone outward like a shockwave. Majin Buu, with his muscular frame, pale pink skin, and curved head tentacle, stood powerfully with clenched fists, as though he had just delivered a devastating strike. Every stone floated suspended in the air, sparks flashing within the gray smoke. Behind him, ruined buildings leaned precariously, windows shattered apart. His face reflected the raging fire behind him across rough pink skin, covered in dirt and scars, creating flickering light across every wrinkle. His eyes burned red, not merely glowing, but alive with menace, smoldering like hot coals. His brows tightened, facial muscles tensed, and his teeth ground together, revealing sharp uneven fangs ready to tear apart anything in his path. Behind him, an ocean of flames exploded while glowing embers danced within trembling air, yet everything else blurred away. Every bead of sweat, every scratch across his skin intensified the tension. The heavy gray sky loomed over a wasteland of shattered concrete and twisted steel. At the center, Goku collapsed across the rubble. His orange gi was torn and covered in dust. One hand gripped a massive rock before him, muscles straining visibly as he fought to hold himself upright through exhaustion. His face tightened with pain and determination. His eyes stared downward, focused only on the final support beneath him. There was no violent movement, only a tense stillness, as though everything had paused before the next inevitable event. A bare hand, rough and torn, clenched stones buried within gray dust. Cracked skin was coated in dirt and dried blood, veins standing out beneath the cold light, exposing both exhaustion and determination. Broken slabs of concrete and scattered rubble surrounded a figure in dark clothing, kneeling among the ruins. The strength of that grip felt as though it were holding on to something beyond survival itself, hope, life, or an oath never spoken aloud. Majin Buu stretched upward amid a sea of fire. His smooth head with its curved extension, his glowing red eyes like burning coals, and his mouth wide open in a silent yet overwhelming roar. The sky behind him was torn apart by blazing orange lightning branching like glowing veins of rage. Black storm clouds twisted violently, reflecting flames rising from the ruined city below. Urban ruins lingered faintly through smoke and dust, like the remains of a civilization erased from existence. The orange glow of fire and lightning slashed through layers of cold ash-gray darkness. The air itself felt dense and oppressive, like the final moment before the apocalypse. The scene froze between destruction and absolute power, a declaration that the being standing there was the embodiment of annihilation. Majin Buu stood towering like a living monument. His muscles bulged violently, every fiber illuminated by firelight, as though power itself were bursting beyond the limits of his body. Both arms spread wide, fists clenched, head thrown back in a roar that split the heavens. His glowing eyes reflected blazing orange lightning tearing apart the sky behind him. Electrical currents spread like webs, merging with the sea of fire erupting from the city's ruins. Chunks of concrete and metal floated through the air as though trapped within the center of an invisible explosion. The distant city had become only blurred shapes within dense smoke and dust. The inferno behind him formed a halo like hellish wings around his distorted body. It was the eruption of overwhelming power, the world standing before a force beyond control, while everything around it became only the final remnants of destruction nearing completion. Heavy twilight weighed over the world as storm clouds twisted across the sky, staining the distant city in dark shades of gray and violet. Goku stood atop the rubble of a recently destroyed structure, broken stone and bent steel, serving as proof of a brutal battle. He lowered his head, breathing heavily, one arm rising to wipe blood from his mouth. His powerful body was covered in dirt and wounds, the torn orange gi clinging tightly to his burned skin. Every drop of sweat and blood reflected the fading sunlight, creating a glow both tragic and fierce. The wind lashed through his upright black hair like flames, while his eyes, cold and unwavering, stared toward the horizon where an unseen threat waited. Behind him, the city stretched out in silence, like a battlefield after a storm, carrying the feeling that everything was far from over. The setting sun tore through heavy clouds, shining directly upon the horizon where the ruined city sprawled endlessly. That radiant golden light seemed to burn away everything left behind. In the foreground stood Goku. His face was smeared with dust and blood, jaw clenched tight, eyes blazing with uncontrollable fury. He screamed, a roar that tore through space itself, echoing like a challenge hurled toward the enemy ahead. His shredded orange gi whipped violently in the wind, revealing a body battered by wounds yet still overflowing with strength. Every cut and bruise from the battle before became proof of the immense energy surging violently from within him. Vegeta's face was strained to its absolute limit. Veins bulged beneath skin smeared with sweat and dirt. His teeth were clenched tight, his lips twisted into an expression of both fury and agony, as if he were forcing himself against an invisible power tearing his body apart from within. His hair stood upright, sharp as blades, trembling slightly in the scorching wind sweeping across the battlefield. The blue armor clinging to his body was scratched and stained, a symbol of resilience that refused to fall. His gaze lowered, focused, burning with a nearly insane determination. There was no hesitation left, only rage, pride, and an iron will ready to erupt. The prelude to an explosion. A transformation was taking shape, smoldering, violent, and irreversible. Flames roared behind him. The fire surged violently, swallowing the background whole and turning everything into a blazing inferno. Majin Buu, his pale pink skin rough and slick with sweat, reflected the flames like red-hot metal. His eyes glowed a burning crimson, not merely a stare, but a living threat, as if fury itself burned within them. Deep wrinkles twisted into a warped expression of pure hatred. His teeth ground together, each fang exposed through a restrained growl, like a beast trying to hold itself back before exploding. Sweat rolled down his face, evaporating the instant it touched the heat of the flames behind him. There was only a threatening stillness. Yet that stillness was more terrifying than any explosion. Vegeta erupted like an electric shock, his fury reaching its breaking point. The warm glow of sunset was gone. In its place, lingered a cold, steel, blue atmosphere torn apart by white-blue lightning, twisting like the claws of the sky. He screamed, his mouth wide open, every muscle in his face convulsing violently, as though his own body were being forced apart from the inside, by an immense surge of energy. His eyes blazed with a brilliant blue light, so intense it seemed capable of piercing space itself, turning his gaze into a tangible force. Sweat glistened across Vegeta's skin, every vein standing out clearly, pulsing in rhythm with the energy surging through him. His armor was worn and torn, covered in dust and battle scars, now little more than a fragile shell before the storm erupting from within. Lightning crackled around him, lashing through the air with sharp, piercing shrieks, each bolt like the heartbeat of an awakening power. The space behind him blurred, as though reality itself were warping beneath the intensity of that energy. Within the gloomy gray tones of the storm-filled sky, Goku collapsed onto the cracked, rocky ground. His orange gi was stained with dust and torn apart, clinging to his tense muscular frame. His legs stretched forward. Every grain of dust and pebble around him trembled, as though an overwhelming force were pressing outward from inside his body. His face twisted into a voiceless roar, teeth clenched, eyes shut tight, every feature strained to the limit. It was not only pain, but the compression of a power on the verge of exploding. The blue sash around his waist whipped violently, caught in an invisible vortex of energy. In the distance, faint outlines of buildings blurred behind clouds of dust. Space itself trembled, the sky hung heavy, as though signaling a moment of transformation, a change capable of overturning the entire course of destiny. Buu's pale pink skin was cold like raw flesh, stretched tightly over rippling muscles. He stood upright, motionless, a posture that required no display, yet radiated authority. His loose white pants swayed quietly in the dusty wind, tightened by a black belt marked with a striking symbol, like a seal of supreme power. His hands hung loosely, yet his fingers curled slightly, a subtle detail, suggesting that with the smallest movement, the entire world could shatter. His narrow red eyes showed neither anger nor haste, only the coldness of one long accustomed to destruction. He did not need to scream or tense himself, his power lay in terrifying stillness. Around him, the city had collapsed. Buildings leaned and crumbled like broken bones, swallowed by thick clouds of dust. Above, black storm clouds churned while the dim light made it seem as though the sun itself had abandoned this place. A heavy foot slammed down onto the fractured ground. The instant it made contact, everything seemed to explode apart. Stone shattered, dust erupted in thick waves, fragments blasted outward in a near-weightless suspension, as though gravity itself had been distorted by an invisible force. His loose white pants billowed with each step, stained by ash and debris. His arms hung at his sides, dark fingers curling slightly, never hurried, never uncertain. Every movement carried the certainty of a ruler. Majin Buu. Veins and folds layered across his face, tightening around eyes burning with a crimson glow, the embodiment of pure destructive instinct. Those eyes, never blinked, never wavered, they locked onto their target like a sentence already decided. Fragments of stone and dust floated through the air, spiraling as though an unseen force were warping space itself. Every particle struck the cold gray light, forming a suffocating living haze. His mouth parted slightly, revealing clenched teeth, the dry friction sounding like metal grinding against metal in the dark. There was no deafening roar, only the compression of fury waiting to erupt. Pure brutality. No humanity. No hesitation. He had come to end everything. Gohan descended from the sky and landed hard upon the ground, knees bent, fists clenched at his sides. The instant he touched down, a ring of dust and debris burst outward beneath him, forming a widening crater. Broken chunks of concrete were hurled upward, suspended in the thickened air, spinning slowly as though a thunderous impact had been restrained, not yet fully released. The shadows from his upper body covered his lowered face. His black hair stood upright, one strand falling over his forehead and concealing the dangerous look in his eyes. The muscles in his arms and shoulders tightened visibly, veins standing out like steel cables, signaling a power being forced to its limit. Behind him, the sky churned with black-gray storm clouds, heavy and unstable. Ruined buildings leaned crookedly like silent witnesses to the awakening about to unfold. There was only silence before an eruption. And this time, the one preparing to shatter that silence was not the destroyer, but the one ready to rise and confront it. Gohan stood proudly at the center. The ground beneath him was cracked and covered in dust and rubble. He carried the stance of a warrior, broad and muscular, standing firmly in a combat-ready posture. His hair stood upright, his cold eyes fixed straight ahead, radiating unwavering resolve and absolute concentration. The contours of his body and the hardened expression on his face captured the instant before a fateful battle would begin. The air was thick with dust and ash. Goku's skin was dirty and scarred, smeared with dried blood and sand. His black hair stood wildly upright in the wind. His body was tense from exhaustion and determination, every breath heavy after brutal blows. Yet on that face rested a crooked smile, mixed with resilience and defiance, revealing a spirit unwilling to yield. Majin Buu's pale pink skin was thick and wrinkled, stretched across massive muscles beneath. Every fold was deep and slick with clammy sweat, reflecting the cold light of the darkened sky behind him. His eyes burned with a deep crimson glow, like embers smoldering with bottomless rage. That stare locked onto its target, razor-sharp and murderous, making the surrounding space itself seem to shrink. His teeth ground together, exposing rough white fangs in a silent growl, the moment before his madness exploded. He was the embodiment of primal wrath, not merely a being who wanted to fight, but one who wanted to destroy everything. Gohan's upper body was powerfully built. Sweat covered his skin, glimmering beneath the cold light, every drop reflecting like metal and accentuating the rippling muscles and protruding veins along his arms. His hands clenched tightly together, a gesture both calm and overflowing with strength, as though suppressing an imminent explosion. All focus converged upon that silent moment before the storm, where power, will, and concentration united into a single point. Piccolo stood towering amid the ruins of a city that had just endured destruction. Above him, the sky churned with dense black clouds, heavy as though nature's wrath had yet to subside. His tall figure, green skin, and broad shoulders loomed powerfully. Piccolo turned slightly to the side, his sharp gaze fixed upon the dark horizon, as though tracking a threat drawing near. The white turban wrapped tightly around his head contrasted sharply against his green skin and dark purple gi, while the enormous white cape behind him billowed violently in the wind, stretching beneath the silver-gray light of the stormy sky, like the banner of the last guardian fluttering amid ruin and despair. Far away, ruined buildings rose like charred concrete skeletons. A veil of dust covered the landscape, blurring everything into a haze. The warrior's imposing form resembled a living monument amid the ashes. His green face was stark beneath the cold light, every sharp feature carved deeper by tension and determination. His narrowed eyes cut like blades, while his clenched teeth hinted at the rage smoldering beneath the surface. The white turban clung tightly to his head, while the cape behind him whipped violently, twisted by the wind into powerful arcs, as though even the storm itself bowed before Piccolo's presence. The dark purple gi wrapped around his solid frame, secured by a blue sash at the waist, while red bands encircled his arms. Both fists tightened, knuckles rising beneath taut skin, signaling that the moment of eruption was only heartbeats away. His stance remained rooted firmly to the earth, revealing an unshakable will. His green skin revealed every rough detail, wrinkles, scars, veins etched deeply by time and countless battles. Piccolo raised both arms, removing his turban and cape. The two antennae curving from his forehead trembled slightly in the storm-heavy wind. His eyes were half closed, gaze lowered, not from weakness, but from absolute concentration, an inner force compressed to its very limit. His expression was stern, lips pressed tight, jaw locked rigid, as though one more moment would unleash a fury beyond restraint. The lead-gray sky behind him continued to weigh heavily upon the world, ruined buildings fading into distant shadows. The world itself seemed to retreat, giving way to this violent inner moment. Future Trunks, his pale purple hair whipped wildly by the storm winds, each strand lashing like a reflection of the anger rising within him. His face was cold and hardened, eyes narrowed with vigilance and determination, as though he had already foreseen an unavoidable ending. There was no panic, only the absolute focus of someone accustomed to war. His dark blue jacket flared with each step, revealing the black shirt beneath, simple yet practical. The sword strapped across his back rose over his shoulder, cold and silent, yet carrying the promise of explosive violence. The strap crossing his chest held the weapon tightly against him like an inseparable part of his being. Behind him, the city stretched like an abandoned battlefield, tilting buildings, shattered ruins, swallowed in haze and dull gray light. The sky remained oppressive, storm clouds twisting downward, making the air suffocating. The wind blew fiercely, his coat and hair in constant motion, a warrior burdened by a heavy past, walking through ruins while preparing to face a battle he knew would change everything. Trunks stood firm like the last warrior. His pale purple hair whipped violently in the wind, creating a sense of savage motion. His face was hardened, stained with dirt and wounds, his cold focused eyes carrying the weight of too much loss, yet refusing to surrender. The long sword was raised horizontally before him, its blade reflecting a cold light, like a fragile line between life and death. Trunks' face was tense, skin darkened by dust, fresh scratches still visible, blue eyes sharp, as knives locked onto an enemy ahead. His mouth parted slightly, as though he had just shouted a challenge or released a roar suppressed for far too long. The sword in his hands, its steel blade stretched forward, reflected a chilling light. Both hands gripped the hilt tightly, muscles tense, not merely a defensive stance, but preparation for a decisive strike. Future Trunks stood tall at the center, like a monument amid the ruins. His pale purple hair hung lower now, no longer wild, but quietly swaying in the cold wind. His face was calm yet resolute, eyes gazing into the distance as though confronting an unavoidable destiny. The sword was now lowered at his right side, its blade angled diagonally toward the ground, reflecting the dull light from the stormy sky. His left hand tightened into a fist, a silent yet heavy gesture, as if restraining an overwhelming rage or an explosive determination. Behind him, the ruined city stretched to the horizon. Buildings leaned and crumbled like the skeletons of giants, swallowed beneath the darkness of swirling storm clouds. There was no longer any frantic movement, only a crushing stillness, like the moment just before the final battle begins. Beneath the gloomy sky, where storm clouds twisted as if foretelling a catastrophic event, stood Tien Shinhan, a muscular, bald man whose skin glistened with dampness, as though he had just emerged from rain or battle. On his forehead stood out a third eye, a surreal detail that made the entire image feel mysterious and immensely powerful. He raised both hands before him, forming a perfect triangle, as though focusing his energy or preparing to unleash a devastating technique. His cold, concentrated gaze pierced through the empty space between his palms. The scars across his chest told stories of brutal battles long past. Behind him, the city lay in ruins, its buildings crooked and devastated, frozen in the moment before an immense power is unleashed. Tien Shinhan floated in midair, seated cross-legged in absolute meditation, his body unmoving like a stone statue amidst chaos. His bare, muscular skin glowed beneath the cold light of the darkened sky, faint scars marking the traces of countless battles. On his forehead, the third eye rested half open, a symbol of supernatural power and awakening beyond human limits. His hands rested gently on his knees, fingers forming a seal as though balancing an invisible energy spreading through space itself. The green cloth wrapped around his body fluttered softly in the wind, accented by a crimson sash glowing like smoldering fire. Buu's skin was glossy and wrinkled, tinted with an unnatural pinkish-purple hue that reflected the cold light from the stormy sky behind him. His glowing red eyes radiated unease and menace. His mouth stretched unnaturally wide, revealing layers of sharp, crowded teeth, while strands of viscous saliva hung between his jaws, glimmering like threads beneath the light. Veins bulged visibly around his neck and face, making him appear tense and unstable, as though his body were enduring an invisible pressure. The folds of his face twisted together, resembling both a monstrous grin and a savage roar. Landing atop a cracked concrete rooftop, where the wind whispered through fractures like the dying breath of a collapsing city, Android 18 knelt low with one knee against the ground, recovering from a powerful impact and preparing herself for an unavoidable confrontation. Her bright blonde hair drifted gently in the wind, standing out against the heavy purple-gray sky thick with storm clouds. Her face was cold and focused, her gaze lowered yet, filled with restrained tension. She wore a striped long-sleeve shirt beneath a faded denim jacket, paired with dark pants and brown boots. Behind her, the skyline was filled with ruined skyscrapers leaning in decay, beneath the dim, oppressive light, cold, silent, and heavy like the calm before a massive storm. Android 18 stood upright atop the rough concrete rooftop, her bright blonde hair whipped violently in the wind, strands sweeping across her cold, sharp face. One hand rose to brush her hair aside, a small but controlled gesture, as though steadying herself before something monumental was about to happen. Her sharp blue eyes stared forward, filled with vigilance, determination, and a trace of anxiety. Her pale skin beneath the gloomy light only emphasized the emotions surging within her. This time, however, it was no longer mere caution. Her gaze had become icy and absolutely focused, as though she had crossed beyond fear itself and touched true power. The wind drifted softly through her hair, but every movement seemed drawn toward one single point, her hand. Within her palm burned a radiant sphere of energy, a dazzling pink-purple mass swirling like a miniature nebula. Tiny sparks of electricity crackled around it like imprisoned lightning. Its glow illuminated her face, staining her skin and eyes with vibrant color, making her appear both breathtakingly beautiful and terrifyingly unpredictable. Vegeta tilted his head slightly to one side, standing with his arms crossed, his body steady like a statue. His dark blue suit clung tightly to him, while the scratched silver chest armor was coated in dust and marks of impact, telling a story without words. His angular, tanned face bore scratches and dried sweat, not from fear, but from battle. His eyes glanced sideways into the distance, cold and calculating, as though evaluating an unseen threat. There was no panic, only absolute control and unwavering faith in his own strength. Vegeta then turned his head toward the opposite side. His black, upright hair whipped violently in the wind, each strand carrying the intensity of his inner turmoil. His angular face was marked with scratches and traces of impact, yet his gaze remained sharp and unwavering, fixed upon something beyond the frame, as though confronting an invisible enemy. Looking ahead, Vegeta's face tightened into a restrained roar. His teeth clenched together, while veins and wrinkles deepened across his skin, as though the power within him was on the verge of breaking past its limits. His piercing eyes burned with rage and determination, a stare capable of incinerating anything that dared stand in his way. His arms remained crossed before his chest, but it was no longer a calm posture. It was restraint, the final instant before an overwhelming power erupts. The space around him seemed to fall silent, giving way to the sensation that, within moments, everything would explode into an unstoppable storm. Every emotion had been compressed to its absolute limit. The sky behind him was buried beneath layers of heavy gray clouds, torn apart by flashes of lightning like signs of nature's fury itself. At the center stood Goku, battered yet unbroken. His face was smeared with dirt and dried blood, sweat mixed with grime, tracing along the sharp lines of his face and reflecting the cold light of the approaching storm. His eyes locked forward, fierce and intense, as though piercing through an invisible enemy. His teeth ground together while his lips parted in a restrained growl, creating the feeling that, in just another second, the power inside him would erupt beyond control. His black hair stood upright, every sharp strand swaying slightly in the storm winds. His torn orange gi, stained with dirt and sweat, contrasted against his battered skin, a symbol of resilience forged through deadly battles. Then came the explosive moment, a roar that tore through space itself, violent and suffocatingly alive. Goku's mouth opened wide in a furious scream, every muscle in his face twisting as veins bulged violently, as though power were forcing its way out of his body. His skin was covered in dust, blood, and glistening sweat beneath the cold light, creating a brutally realistic image. The countless scratches across his body did not make him appear weak, instead, they made him resemble the final survivor of an apocalypse. His wide eyes burned with determination and unquenchable fury, staring directly at the enemy before him. His black hair rose upward in chaotic, blade-like spikes, as though blown apart by invisible energy. His shredded orange guy, soaked in dust and sweat, clung tightly to his tensed body, emphasizing a state beyond human limits. From the darkened heavens, 5 colossal streams of energy descended like divine lightning pillars, each carrying a distinct color: blazing orange, icy blue, mysterious purple, and searing green, all converging upon a single point on the ground. The moment they struck became the center of destruction. A massive explosion erupted outward, blasting the streets apart into shattered fragments. Stone, concrete, and metal were ripped free, and suspended in the air as though gravity itself had ceased to exist. The shockwave spread violently, carrying thick clouds of dust that swallowed everything behind it. The ground in the foreground split open into deep fractures. On both sides, the ruins of towering skyscrapers swayed like broken concrete skeletons, silently witnessing the wrath that had descended upon them. Light from the explosion pierced through the dust, creating a blinding halo at the center, pure, absolute destruction. A colossal explosion erupted at the center, consuming the world in blazing orange light. Shockwaves spread violently, tearing the earth apart with jagged cracks, as though the planet itself were screaming. Chunks of concrete and metal were hurled skyward, spinning amidst oceans of thick smoke and dust. For an instant, every fragment seemed frozen in time before being swept away by the invisible pressure wave. In the background, ruined skyscrapers leaned crookedly, blurred behind gray smoke, evoking hopelessness and devastation. Above, the sky darkened completely, as though nature itself were being suffocated by the force of the explosion. The light from the epicenter burned fiercely against the cold tones surrounding it, where destruction reached its peak and reality itself seemed to collapse within a single fateful moment. A gigantic beam of white light swept across space, so powerful that it erased every surrounding detail, like a wave of energy tearing the heavens apart. The air trembled as streaks of light stretched endlessly, the energy surging forward at unimaginable speed. Majin Buu's head extended upward like a grotesque curved tentacle, swaying like a sign of twisted evolution. His glowing red eyes burned brightly while his warped grin revealed icy blue teeth, insane, cruel, and predatory, reveling in destruction. Buu effortlessly endured the brilliant blue-white stream of energy, like a gigantic blade of light slicing through space itself. Sparks crackled violently around him while the glow reflected across every muscle fiber, emphasizing his terrifying, almost immortal appearance. Majin Buu drew himself inward, his muscular body swelling with immense power, his pale pink skin stretched tightly as though containing strength beyond natural limits. Every muscle stood sharply defined beneath the cold light, radiating overwhelming weight and dominance. His face was a fusion of madness and pleasure, glowing red eyes burned like embers in darkness, his piercing gaze cutting through everything before him. His grin stretched unnaturally wide, exposing tightly clenched teeth, as though he were savoring the moment of absolute supremacy. Energy and fury became one. Piccolo's 2 antennae rose from his forehead, trembling slightly within the swirling aura. His body was powerful, every muscle tightening beneath his worn purple cloak, as though each movement stored unimaginable force. His right arm swung forward in a decisive punch that tore through the air, while his left fist tightened behind him, wrapped in a swirling green aura. Green lightning crackled violently around his clenched hand like a storm compressed into his palm. His face twisted in a silent roar, sharp eyes, clenched teeth, deep wrinkles carved across his brow by determination and rage. Behind him, the city faded into gray haze, buildings standing motionless like helpless witnesses to the clash of beings beyond the human world. Piccolo's powerful arm thrust forward, muscles coiling like living steel. From his palm erupted a spiraling ring of radiant purple energy, glowing violently like a dimensional rift tearing reality apart. The energy pulsed and discharged arcs of purple lightning, colliding with the golden light of the explosion raging ahead, creating a chaotic storm of light. The air itself seemed to thicken beneath the pressure of such power. Wind was torn apart while dust and debris scattered violently in every direction. Everything converged into this single moment, a destructive attack where strength and rage reached their absolute peak. Everything seemed stretched apart by speed and light. A blazing golden streak dominated the center, brilliant like an exploding energy burst, radiating into long blurred trails. Along the edges, purple and pink merged together, making space itself appear torn open and warped by an invisible force. A radiant purple beam of energy shot forward like the spear of a god. Majin Buu extended one arm forward, his hand spread wide, every finger seeming to command the destructive force itself. His glossy black fingernails radiated absolute danger. The moment of impact erupted violently, the purple energy beam pierced through the air, only to be effortlessly stopped by Buu's hand, exploding into thousands of golden sparks that scattered like fireworks from hell. Flashes of light illuminated the clouds of dust and smoke, making the entire sky tremble. The energy blast was forced backward. In the distance, a building was blown apart, flames and debris bursting outward in deadly silence. The roar of energy, the cracking of concrete, and the tense heartbeat of a battle, reaching its climax, filled the air. In a fleeting instant, light burst from within the tower, a blinding white explosion, violent like the heart of a star tearing itself apart. The shockwave ripped through the concrete floors, hurling walls and steel frames outward like shattered memories being crushed apart. Flames erupted from the base of the building, blazing red and savage, as though hell itself had risen from beneath the earth. The surrounding buildings stood motionless, some already collapsed, others reduced to hollow blackened skeletons. Layers of smoke and dust swirled upward into the gloomy sky, blurring the line between earth and heaven. There was only suffocating silence after the eruption. A colossal pillar of fire shot straight into the sky, tearing through the heart of the city like a blazing spear. The explosion bloomed into a mushroom cloud, black, thick, and rolling violently, like a monstrous creature rising from beneath the ground. The fiery orange light from the core of the blast pierced through every layer of smoke, illuminating the heavy storm clouds above and staining the entire sky with the colors of the apocalypse. Chunks of concrete, steel, and shattered glass were hurled skyward, suspended in the air. The entire city was swallowed by light and ashes, as though it had never existed. The massive explosion erupted, spiraling into a towering column of thick gray-black smoke that rose into the gloomy sky. Heavy clouds of dust swelled and piled atop one another like frozen tidal waves suspended in midair. Flickers of fire glowed from the heart of the explosion, red-hot and furious, piercing through the dense smoke. The ground in the foreground was covered in rubble and shattered stone, like the remains of a world that had just been torn apart. Amid the swirling sea of dust behind them, two warriors stood firm like living monuments within a storm of destruction. Majin Buu, his massive body packed with bulging muscles, bare back tightened beneath the dim light, twisted powerfully as though he had just unleashed a thunderous strike. Every muscle fiber stood out sharply, embodying raw and merciless strength. Gohan, with his upright hair, braced himself in a defensive-offensive stance, fists clenched, body leaning forward as though ready to charge into the next battle. His posture radiated absolute concentration, as though every sense was focused on this very instant. Behind them, the gigantic wall of smoke and dust continued to rise, swallowing the horizon and blurring the boundary between land and sky. Tiny particles floated through the air, catching the faint light and forming a suffocating haze heavy with pressure. Buu's shoulder twisted slightly, his arm tightening, the posture of someone ready to deliver a finishing blow. Gohan lunged forward, body leaning ahead, fist drawn back as though gathering every ounce of strength for a decisive strike. The pressure from the explosion behind them stretched the atmosphere itself, creating a sense of violent motion. The two figures crashed into one another in a moment of brutal impact. Majin Buu braced himself like a living boulder. His muscles bulged beneath the gloomy light, veins tightening as he restrained his opponent. Opposite him stood Gohan, more agile in build, struggling desperately within the suffocating stalemate. Their bodies twisted together, force and counterforce colliding like hidden tidal waves. Dust rose with every movement, sparkling faintly in the dim light like ashes. After battle, there was no pause, only strength, survival, and fury compressed into every breath. Their locked bodies sent stone and earth exploding upward in a violent arc, spreading outward like a tsunami made of dust and debris. Buu still held his opponent tightly within crushing arms. Muscles bulged violently beneath the dusty haze, every fiber appearing to scream with strain. Gohan, though smaller in frame, was far from helpless, pressed tightly within the struggle, yet still resisting amidst the quake-like impact. Every grain of dirt and every fragment of stone hung suspended in the air, faint light reflecting off them like dying sparks. The entire battlefield trembled. There was only power colliding with power at the heart of destruction. The sky hung heavy beneath layers of lead-gray clouds, swirling as though compressing their own fury. Then a colossal explosion erupted, flames flashing brilliantly for an instant before being swallowed by a rapidly expanding mass of dense dust. The shockwave spread like an invisible beast, hurling earth and debris outward in surging circles. The surrounding skyscrapers, already ruined, became even more fragile, shattered walls and exposed concrete frames, standing like gigantic skeletons abandoned after the apocalypse. It was the complete image of a city utterly devastated. Dust rose into gigantic pillars of smoke, swallowing every road and every trace of life. At the center of it all, the core of the explosion still crackled with dying sparks, like the fading heartbeat of a collapsing world. The roar of destruction echoed through the cold ruins. Their collision triggered a storm of energy, sparks flying everywhere, flashes of light exploding violently, and shockwaves surging outward, sweeping away everything around them. Ruined buildings leaned precariously on both sides like silent witnesses to the battle. The ground shattered apart as stone and metal were torn loose and hurled into the sky. A gigantic column of smoke spiraled upward beneath the darkened heavens, creating an overwhelming sense of pressure and suffocation. At the center, the two tiny figures compared to the devastation surrounding them were the source of it all, a clash carrying power far beyond human limits. The collision erupted within the ruined city as though space itself had been torn apart by the strength of the two warriors. At the center, a punch launched at terrifying speed created a blinding white halo, exploding outward into hundreds of razor-sharp energy streaks like shattered glass. Dust and smoke churned violently, drowning everything in suffocating ash-gray tones. The skyscrapers behind them appeared blurred through the thick haze. Broken stone and concrete fragments were blasted skyward, suspended within the spreading shockwave. Majin Buu, his bare back tightened with power, charged forward with all his strength. Muscles bulged beneath the dim light of the cold gray sky as he drove a direct punch into Gohan's face. Gohan stood his ground amidst the quake-like impact, his body nearly swallowed by the crushing force of the collision. Majin Buu, overflowing with power, stood wide-legged at the center of chaos like a monster emerging from a nightmare. Gohan clenched his fists tightly, his defensive stance fierce and unwavering, eyes completely focused on the enemy before him. Gohan drove his punch forward with every ounce of willpower, body leaning like an arrow piercing the eye of the storm. Buu resisted, muscles tightening beneath the flickering light of impact. Sparks exploded around them like red-hot metal being crushed by an invisible force. A colossal explosion tore through space like the roar of the apocalypse. A towering column of black smoke surged upward behind them, thick and violent like a cloud of destruction swallowing the sky itself. Within it, orange-red flames burned intensely, casting a hellish glow through the suffocating dust. The sheer scale of the devastation behind them made it seem as though all of that destruction had been created by a single strike. The ground in the foreground cracked apart and lay covered in rubble, broken concrete scattered like traces of a battle beyond imagination. Thick dust was swept into layers by the shockwave, making the air itself seem to vibrate under the pressure. It was the moment absolute power was unleashed, enough to force the entire world into terrified silence. After the climax of a brutal battle, a gigantic crater gaped open, earth and stone ripped apart and hurled everywhere, as though an unimaginable force had crashed down from the sky. Broken slabs of concrete and twisted steel rods jutted deep into the ground, evoking the aftermath of catastrophic destruction. Lying motionless at the center of the crater was Majin Buu, his pink skin stretched over a heavily muscular body. Dust and scratches covered him, proof of the violent battle he had just endured. His fists remained clenched instinctively, as though even in defeat, his fighting spirit had not completely faded. His loose white pants, golden belt, black wristbands, and dark boots were now stained with dirt and rubble. He lay on his back, slightly turned to one side, giving the impression that he had been hurled downward from above with tremendous force. In the background, the devastated city stretched beneath the gloomy sky. Skyscrapers stood destroyed, walls cracked apart, and concrete skeletons exposed like the remains of giants. Thick black clouds blanketed the heavens, drowning the entire scene in cold, oppressive light. Majin Buu leaned against a shattered boulder as he slowly sat up. His skin glistened with sweat and grime, covered in tiny pebbles still falling after the violent impact. Small stones rolled gently across his chest like the final aftershocks of the battle. Blood and dust stained his cheeks, making his face appear even rougher and more savage. His eyes remained tightly shut, brows furrowed as though enduring unbearable pain. His clenched teeth revealed both fury and an unbreakable will. Cold light cut through the haze of dust, emphasizing every tense muscle across his chest and shoulders. Each heavy breath caused his massive chest to rise and fall as he struggled to recover from a blow of terrifying destructive force. Fine dust still drifted through the air, swirling gently around the crater like echoes of the impact that had just occurred. At the center of the devastation, Majin Buu stood upright. His body was coated in dirt and dust, every muscle tightened beneath sweat-covered skin. His arms hung at his sides, fists clenched tightly, giving the impression of power compressed to its limit. His eyes glowed bright red against his cold face and sinister smirk. They resembled two burning embers within the gray haze, signaling a fury that had just awakened. Standing firmly within the crater, he appeared like the very source of destruction itself, while the sounds of falling debris and heavy breathing echoed throughout the pit. The one who had been defeated had risen again and seemed even more dangerous than before. Beneath a dark sky filled with storm clouds lay a heavily devastated city. Skyscrapers leaned precariously, windows shattered, while smoke and dust obscured the horizon like traces of a battle that had just swept through the land. Floating high above the ground was Tien Shinhan, a bald warrior with a solid, muscular body sculpted like stone. At the center of his forehead, his third eye remained partially open, focused and cold, making his face appear even more imposing and terrifying. He wore a green martial arts uniform with a red sash around his waist and golden wraps around his wrists. The folds of his clothing drifted gently in the high-altitude wind, creating a strange calm before the storm of power about to erupt. Both hands were raised before his chest, fingers pressed together into a triangle. Within the empty space between them, a radiant golden sphere of energy slowly formed. Its light spread outward in soft halos, reflecting across his skin and muscles, causing his entire body to glow against the dark sky. His eyes lowered, completely focused on the energy being compressed within his hands. There was no panic, only the calm of a warrior prepared to unleash a decisive attack. Beneath him, the city remained silent, as though holding its breath. Above, the golden light within his palms grew brighter and brighter. Power gathered to its absolute limit, moments before an attack capable of changing the entire battle would be unleashed. Tien Shinhan's muscular body tensed as the power inside him erupted outward. The muscles along his arms and shoulders stood out beneath the blinding light radiating between his hands. His hands formed the familiar triangle shape, but this time the energy within had surpassed all limits. The sphere of golden white light blazed violently, radiating rings of energy like a miniature sun. The brightness overwhelmed even the darkened sky behind him. From the core of the energy, silver-white bolts of electricity burst outward like lightning, twisting through the air and forming a web of power that shook the space around his body. The flashes reflected across his strained face as his mouth opened in a powerful scream. That scream merged with the thunder rolling across the heavens as the energy compressed beyond its limit. The golden light intensified even further while wind and dust spiraled around him, drawn into the center of the storm. A devastating attack was about to be unleashed, a moment where everything could change in a single instant. A colossal pillar of yellow-white energy tore through the sky. The beam erupted from above and slammed straight into the earth, forming a gigantic blazing column of light so brilliant that the entire surrounding landscape was drenched in radiant gold. That light did not merely illuminate the city, it devoured the darkness, transforming the gloomy sky into a blinding sea of fire. The moment the energy pillar struck the ground, the earth exploded apart. Dust and smoke burst outward on both sides like massive shockwaves. Fragments of concrete, metal, and shattered stone were hurled into the air, spiraling within the roaring currents of superheated wind. The surrounding buildings trembled violently, windows shattering as clouds of dust spread through every street. The pressure from the explosion expanded outward like an invisible storm sweeping across the entire district. At the center of it all, the pillar of energy continued to burn, stretching from the heavens into the depths of the earth like a divine spear cast down upon the world. It was the moment when power beyond human limits had been unleashed, turning the entire city into a stage of light and devastation. The ground suddenly erupted like a volcano, awakening from slumber. From the sky above, the colossal yellow-white energy column descended directly upon the center of the land, like divine lightning. The blinding beam pierced through the atmosphere and crashed downward with terrifying force, causing the entire region to quake. The instant the energy struck, a violent explosion erupted. Earth and rock were blasted skyward, massive boulders shattering and scattering in every direction. Shockwaves expanded outward in perfect circles, carving deeper into the already enormous impact crater, while the surrounding walls of earth tore apart and curled upward like waves made of soil and stone. At the heart of the explosion, golden light burned fiercely, forming a radiant halo of energy bursting outward in all directions. Red-hot fragments of stone swirled around the beam while the pillar of energy continued pouring down from the heavens as though drilling through the planet itself. The vast sky above was covered in dense clouds swirling like enormous waves. Daylight filtered through the layers of cloud, creating an atmosphere heavy with tension, as though nature itself were holding its breath before an extraordinary event. A gigantic golden energy column ripped through the heavens, plunging from the upper clouds directly toward the earth. The blinding beam resembled a divine sword descending upon the world, straight, unstoppable, and absolute. Then a massive sea of dust exploded outward. The ground itself seemed to rupture apart as waves of dust and stone surged upward into thick brown-gray clouds, spreading in every direction like a tsunami across land. The center of the impact vanished beneath the gigantic dust storm, yet the beam of light still pierced through everything, continuing to descend like an endless source of power. Dust still swirled violently through the air, thick as a storm erupting from beneath the earth. At the center of the gigantic crater, where the ground had just been torn apart by unimaginable force, a massive figure slowly emerged through the haze. Within the swirling yellow-brown dust stood a towering creature, broad-shouldered and covered in bulging muscles. It appeared at first only as a dark silhouette, yet its presence alone radiated menace. Its stance looked increasingly grotesque and terrifying. Every slight movement caused the surrounding dust to tremble and spread outward. Small chunks of earth continued falling from the crater's edge while dust spiraled around its body like a theatrical curtain. The figure resembled a monster rising from the aftermath of catastrophe itself. After the explosion, after the dust storm, what stood at the center was not destruction itself, but the one who had survived it. Majin Buu stood there. His body was tall and powerfully built, smooth pink-purple skin stretched tightly over muscles carved like stone. His silhouette looked both monstrous and horrifying. Every contour across his chest and arms tightened beneath the light, suggesting a terrifying power barely contained within. His eyes glowed with a burning crimson light like smoldering embers in darkness. A sinister grin spread across his face, exposing sharp white teeth, the smile of someone who had walked out from the center of destruction and enjoyed every second of it. His loose white pants shifted gently in the settling dust. The belt marked with the dark M symbol rested against his massive frame. Around him, the gigantic crater formed a nearly perfect circle. Its walls collapsed into layers of scorched and fractured earth. The final grains of dust drifted down from the rim, an empty battlefield, a colossal crater. And at its center, a nightmare had awakened. He laughed. A laugh that split his face wide open. His mouth stretched unnaturally wide, revealing rows of cold white fangs layered like those of a predatory beast. Beyond them lay a deep darkness like a bottomless abyss. His eyes burned red like live coals, crimson light glowing from deep within their sockets and reflecting across his glossy skin. That gaze was not merely savage, it was the pleasure of something finally freed from its chains. His muscular arms spread wide to either side, muscles coiling beneath taut skin, as though he were embracing the entire world within the arms of destruction. Majin Buu threw his head back in booming laughter, a laugh that echoed like a declaration that destruction itself had awakened. His mouth opened unnaturally wide, stretching his entire face. Rows of sharp white teeth gleamed like knives. Deep within his throat lay endless darkness, where his laughter roared like the echo of an ancient monster. His facial muscles twitched with pleasure, wrinkles gathering across his forehead, making him appear both brutal and insane. His right arm rose high toward the sky, hands spread open. Floating just above his palm was a blazing pink-purple sphere of energy spinning violently. The energy glowed with blinding intensity, discharging sparks and spiraling plasma smoke that caused the air itself above his hand to ripple as though burning. Purple light from the sphere washed over his body, bathing him in an eerie glow. Majin Buu lifted his face upward. His eyes burned red like blazing embers. And upon that face spread a smile, so wide it became terrifying. White teeth gleamed within that ecstatic grin, stretching his features into an expression both savage and insane, as though he were savoring every moment of the destruction about to unfold. The black belt bearing the golden M symbol at his waist trembled slightly from the energy radiating through his body. The black wristbands trimmed in gold resembled shattered restraints finally broken apart. Around him, the layers of earth forming the giant crater faded beneath the spreading purple light. And at the center of everything, Majin Buu stood with one arm raised high, the swelling energy sphere growing larger every second. As though with one simple motion of his hand, the entire world could vanish within that light. Pink-purple energy illuminated his body from the sphere before him, causing him to glow like a creature emerging from hell itself. The colossal energy sphere burned with blinding brilliance. Its core blazed pure white while its outer layers radiated violent shades of pink and purple. Arcs of energy shot outward like lightning, stretching across the sky before vanishing into the atmosphere. The force of the sphere made the air tremble, causing dust around the crater to swirl gently as though being drawn inward. The energy sphere continued to expand. Purple light spread throughout the crater. Majin Buu swung his arm violently to the side. The gigantic energy sphere blazed like a miniature purple-pink sun. Inside it, streams of power spiraled like an electrical storm while violet sparks trailed behind it like the tail of a comet. Majin Buu hurled it forward at a speed that tore through the air. The sphere spun violently, its glow intensifying as the entire crater became submerged in radiant purple light. And with Majin Buu's insane roar, one more movement, and that destructive power would be unleashed, enough to erase everything before him. High above the battlefield floated a lone warrior, Tien Shinhan. His body tensed as both hands extended forward, every ounce of his strength focused on resisting the gigantic energy sphere rushing toward him. Muscles bulged beneath the brilliant pink glow of the destructive force closing in. Before Tien Shinhan hovered a massive pink-purple sphere of energy, its surface cracked like molten lava. Inside, streams of electricity twisted together, roaring like a trapped storm of pure power. A comet-like trail of energy stretched behind it, connecting to the sphere while streaks of light and shattered energy particles scattered through the air. The blinding pink light illuminated the entire darkened sky, reflecting across the ruined buildings and making the city appear submerged within the glow of an imminent explosion. It was a desperate struggle between strength and willpower. Though the gigantic sphere continued pressing downward relentlessly, Tien Shinhan still fought to hold it back, suspended within the black sky above a dying city. And amidst that storm of pink light, the lone warrior became the final wall, standing against a force capable of erasing the entire city. At the center of the ruined city, a gigantic sphere of light erupted violently. Blinding white and pink radiance consumed the entire landscape, blazing like a newborn sun appearing in the middle of the metropolis. Pink-purple energy streaks tore across the heavens, twisting like enormous dragons of lightning. The pressure of the explosion blasted everything around it away. Concrete, steel, and the ruins of buildings were ripped from the ground and hurled into the sky. Broken masonry and steel frameworks spun violently, pulled into the expanding storm of energy. On both sides, skyscrapers cracked apart and collapsed in sections, glass exploding outward while concrete walls tore like paper beneath the shockwave. Smoke, dust, and light merged together, transforming the entire city into an ocean of fire and energy. Everything was being blown away from the center of the blast, yet the gigantic energy sphere continued swelling larger and larger, as though preparing to consume the entire city in one final explosion. The sunset painted the sky golden behind him while thick clouds formed a dramatic backdrop foretelling another battle about to begin. In the foreground stood Vegeta, overlooking the shadowed city below as fierce winds whipped through his signature upright black hair, making it appear even more violent. His face tightened, eyes burning with rage and determination. His mouth opened in a thunderous roar, as though the entirety of Saiyan power within him were compressing and erupting at once. Both fists clenched tightly, muscles bulging beneath his blue and white battle armor now stained with the dust of war. Light from the setting sun cut across his body, emphasizing every contour of his armor and muscular frame. It was the instant before power exploded outward, a tense second of silence before the storm of energy erupted. A proud warrior, standing beneath a burning sky, roaring defiance at the entire world. Vegeta tilted his head back toward the heavens, neck muscles strained while his black hair whipped wildly in the wind. He looked like a warrior roaring against fate itself, or releasing the colossal power compressed within him. The sunset light streaked across his shoulders and back, highlighting every muscle beneath his armor. The city before him became a vast backdrop, making his silhouette appear even more solitary, yet overwhelmingly powerful. A lone warrior, standing amidst ruins, facing the vast world before him while wind screamed through the city beneath a crimson sky, as though one more second would be enough for his power to tear space itself apart. Deep wrinkles carved across Vegeta's forehead, facial muscles tightening while his wide eyes burned with fury. His mouth opened in a savage roar, exposing clenched teeth and a strained throat as though every ounce of power within him were being poured into the moment of eruption. The sunset behind him cast a brilliant golden lens flare across his face. That light caused Vegeta's eyes to gleam like molten metal while sweat upon his skin reflected the burning orange glow of the dying sky. His upright black hair was thrown backward by the violent wind, each strand trembling as though swept within an invisible current of energy. Behind him, the city faded into a distant blur of light and shadow beneath the evening sun. It was the final moment before Saiyan power exploded. A roar tearing through space itself, a warrior standing against the setting sun, and a colossal energy surging toward its limit. Son Goku's eyes widened as though he had just witnessed something beyond imagination. Heavy breathing parted his lips slightly, while scratches, dirt, and dried blood marked his cheeks and chin, the remnants of a brutal battle that had only just taken place. His signature orange gi was torn and covered in dust, the frayed edges of the fabric fluttering gently in the wind. Goku's iconic black hair stood upright, blown wildly by the storm winds beneath the darkened sky. Behind him stretched a vast city fading into the distance. Towering skyscrapers sank beneath the dim light of sunset, obscured by layers of heavy gray clouds. The final light of day cut through the clouds in streaks of golden orange, illuminating the tension carved across his face. It was the stillness before the storm. Goku stood amidst the ruins of battle, eyes fixed on something approaching from the horizon, a sign that the real battle may have only just begun. Goku's eyes widened, his pupils shrinking in shock, while his lips parted slightly as though he had just sensed a horrifying threat above the sky. His signature black hair was whipped into sharp spikes by the wind, forming a powerful silhouette against the cloud-filled heavens. His familiar orange gi was torn at the shoulders, frayed and stained with dust, scars left behind by the battle he had endured. Behind him, storm clouds hung heavily across the sky while the last rays of daylight pierced through the gaps, bathing the world in tense cinematic tones. It carried the feeling that something colossal was appearing in the heavens. A single breath suspended in the middle of war. Goku was not afraid, but his eyes revealed that he had just witnessed a power beyond anything he had imagined. Golden-orange sunset light struck across his face, illuminating the dried blood and dust still clinging to his cheeks, nose, and chin. His lips parted slightly as heavy breaths escaped him, as though he had just seen a force greater than anything he had ever faced before. In that silent moment, Goku's eyes remained locked on one point, something approaching, something capable of changing the fate of the entire world. A warrior exhausted from battle, yet whose eyes still burned with an unbreakable will against the coming fight. Android 18 lifted her face upward, blue eyes widened in horror. Her pupils expanded as though reflecting a terrifying sight that had just appeared in the sky. Her lips parted slightly, her breath caught within her throat as though she had realized something impossible. Her hands rose instinctively toward her face. Her fingers trembled faintly, curling inward as though trying to cling to a reality slipping beyond control. Her pale blonde hair was whipped violently by the wind, loose strands sweeping across her cheeks. Behind her, the city resembled a dying battlefield. Gray skyscrapers leaned precariously amidst thick clouds of dust. Some structures appeared partially destroyed, windows shattered and concrete exposed in jagged ruin. Above, the sky was swallowed by deep purple storm clouds twisting heavily, like a supernatural tempest approaching. Cold light from the heavens drowned the entire landscape in dark, oppressive tones. The wind swept through carrying dust and fragments of debris suspended in the air. Everything around her seemed trapped in a single silent moment before catastrophe descended, and the terrified face of the young woman became the only emotional anchor within the storm about to erupt. Android 18's face turned pale. Her blue eyes widened so far they almost lost all human composure. Her lips trembled open with rapid breathing, as though a scream of fear had become trapped in her throat. Both hands pressed tightly against her cheeks, trembling fingers digging lightly into her skin. The gesture was not merely horror, it looked as though she were struggling to keep herself from collapsing before a reality falling apart around her. Her pale blonde hair lashed wildly in the storm winds, strands crossing her face and adding to the overwhelming tension and chaos. Android 18's body bent slightly forward as though the weight of the world had suddenly fallen upon her shoulders. Wind swept through the city, blowing her pale blonde hair to one side while strands brushed across her tear-stained cheeks. A single tear slid silently from the corner of her eye, tracing a thin line down her pale skin. Her eyes were no longer wide with panic, but now filled with sorrow and emptiness as she looked downward, confronting a brutal truth. Behind her, the city stretched outward like a graveyard of concrete. Skyscrapers stood motionless beneath the heavy sky, some destroyed, their darkened windows resembling empty eye sockets. Roads in the distance lay nearly deserted beneath layers of gray dust and oppressive weather. Above, the purple-gray storm sky hung overhead like an enormous curtain, its cold light casting the entire world in apocalyptic tones. She stood alone, amidst the ruins of the world, quietly mourning everything that had been lost. Gohan stood amidst the ruins of a destroyed city. His muscular body was exposed beneath a torn sleeveless purple gi covered in dust and grime, the fabric clinging tightly to his sweat-soaked skin after a brutal battle. Scratches and dirt marked his body, making him appear like someone who had just emerged from the hell of war. His black hair rose upward like sharp spikes, wild yet powerful, still carrying traces of violent energy. His eyes were wide with shock and tension, as though he had just witnessed something beyond imagination. Behind him stretched a ruined city, shattered buildings, exposed concrete frames, and broken windows. Dust blanketed the ground, merging with the suffocating atmosphere of destruction. Above, dense storm clouds twisted across the sky, dark and ominous like a warning that the catastrophe was not yet over. Cold, gloomy light covered the entire scene, including his face, where exhaustion, disbelief, and determination struggled against one another. Amid the ruins of the world, he stood motionless for one brief moment, like a warrior who had just realized the true battle had only begun. Gohan's entire body tensed with exertion, both fists clenched tightly before his chest, muscles bulging beneath skin covered in dust and scratches. His sleeveless purple gi was torn apart, the collar ripped open to reveal a chest bruised and soaked with sweat. His black hair stood upright, thick and sharp, like rows of spikes, blown wildly by invisible winds and energy. His face twisted into a roar, mouth wide open, teeth clenched, eyes burning with fury and determination. The power within him was surging violently, ready to erupt. Behind him lay a devastated city, shattered buildings, exposed concrete skeletons, and collapsed walls resembling the bones of a civilization crushed apart. Above, black storm clouds churned violently while cold, oppressive light spread across the battlefield, making the air feel unbearably heavy before the storm. In that moment, everything around him seemed to fall silent, except for the roar of the warrior echoing through the ruins, signaling that a terrifying power was about to be unleashed. Majin Buu stood towering like the ruler of the battlefield. His body was massive and muscular, every fiber visible beneath pale pink skin marked by scars and battle wounds. He looked grotesque and terrifying. A twisted smile spread across his face, malicious and delighted, exposing his teeth in sick enjoyment. His glowing red eyes burned like embers amidst the storm, staring ahead with cold cruelty. His arms hung low but tense, fists tightened as though only moments remained before he unleashed destruction. Around him stretched the shattered remains of the city, overturned vehicles, broken concrete, and collapsed building frames standing like gigantic skeletons. Dust swirled through the air while above, heavy gray storm clouds twisted ominously as though foretelling catastrophe. Within the dead silence of the ruined city, his smile felt like a cold declaration. The destroyer had arrived, and the true battle had only just begun. Majin Buu's muscles bulged as though carved from stone, grotesque and terrifying. His face twisted into a mad grin, sharp teeth exposed in delight. His glowing red eyes resembled blazing furnaces, filled with cruelty and an overwhelming desire for destruction. Both arms rose high as his fingers curled inward like claws crushing the air itself. Pink-purple energy exploded around his hands while sparks and streaks of light burst outward like storms of power. The glow reflected across his body, bathing him entirely in a horrifying aura. Dust swirled violently through the air beneath the heavy gray storm clouds above, where dark masses twisted like signs of nature's wrath. Destruction had begun. His teeth clenched visibly within a malicious smile, as though he savored every second of devastation. Both hands rose before his chest, fingers curved inward into a circular shape. Between his palms, a brilliant pink sphere of energy began to form, radiating blinding light. Lightning-like currents twisted and crackled violently, spreading throughout the surrounding space. The energy sphere's glow reflected across his body, staining his chest and face in eerie pink light. Bolts of electricity raced along his arms, erupting into twisting arcs within the air. In that moment, as the sphere between his hands grew brighter and brighter, his face appeared like a cold warning. An attack powerful enough to erase everything was about to be unleashed. His enormous hands closed together before his chest, fingers curled inward as though imprisoning something unimaginably dangerous. Between his palms, a gigantic sphere of energy burst into existence. The white and pink light was so blinding it nearly swallowed every surrounding detail. It illuminated every vein across his arms, every scar and streak of dirt across his body. The ruined city behind him faded into ghostly silhouettes beneath the eerie glow. The energy inside the sphere appeared compressed with catastrophic force, pulsing like a luminous heart on the verge of exploding. Beams of light leaked through the gaps between his fingers, spreading outward in flickering halos. It felt like a power far too immense to remain contained within his hands, waiting only for the slightest movement to tear apart the heavens and crush everything before him. Son Goku's spiked hair was wild and disordered, as though battered by a violent storm. His face was smeared with dust and scratches, skin glowing beneath strange pink-orange light reflected from a surging source of power. His eyes widened in shock and tension, pupils trembling as though he had witnessed something beyond imagination. His orange fighting gi was shredded at the shoulders, stained with dirt and battle scars. His breathing appeared heavy, as though he stood upon the boundary between total exhaustion and one final awakening. Above him, the sky remained dark and oppressive. Black clouds twisted like an approaching storm, staining the world in cold gray tones. A terrifying force was preparing to erupt. Android 18's blue eyes widened as though she had witnessed something too horrifying to describe. Tears streamed down her pale face, reflecting the cold pink-purple light cast across one side of her features like neon from a dying city. Behind her, the city skyline vanished into darkness beneath a storm-filled sky heavy with black clouds. The atmosphere was silent yet unbearably tense, like the final seconds before collapse. Panic, despair, and loneliness overwhelmed the scene. Majin Buu thrust both hands forward, cradling a violently trembling sphere of brilliant white energy. Its light was so intense that it swallowed his face entirely, reducing everything around him to warped shadows. Lightning tore through the sky on both sides, illuminating the black and gold metallic guards around his wrists, making it seem as though the power of the entire storm were being drawn into the deadly sphere. The atmosphere felt unbearably dense with tension, the instant before destructive power would be unleashed. The ash-gray sky contrasted violently against the white-pink radiance of the sphere. The overwhelming force felt absolute, like an unstoppable entity preparing to crush the world with a single attack. Piccolo clenched his teeth fiercely, jaw muscles tight as though restraining an eruption of rage. Eerie pink-purple light reflected across the wrinkles and bulging veins of his face, creating terrifying depth across his rough skin. Behind him stretched a ruined horizon buried beneath heavy gray clouds, giving the entire world the feeling of a place that had already lost all hope. A savage glare, like the final confrontation between humanity and an entity born from cosmic hell. A colossal crimson energy sphere blazed violently, glowing like the core of a collapsing sun. White bolts of electricity twisted wildly through the semi-transparent mass of energy. It did not merely shine, it roared, ready to explode at any moment. Two massive hands held the chaotic power at its sides, fingers stretched wide as though struggling to control an energy far beyond all limits. Every bolt of lightning from the storm-filled sky behind seemed to be drawn directly into the sphere, as if nature itself were being bent by this destructive force. The crimson-pink light flooded everything, burning away every other color and transforming the scene into a surreal nightmare. The distant buildings became nothing more than ghostly silhouettes within the haze and electric glow. Vegeta screamed in an eruption of fury. Every muscle in his face tightened to the limit, his crimson eyes blazing with an unbreakable will like the final flame left burning at the end of the world. His clenched fists trembled from the power surging through his body. His battle armor was faded, scratched, and covered in ash and dust. The pink-purple light reflected across his skin and armor, blending with the fiery orange glow of the burning sky. The wind howled around Vegeta, lifting his upright black hair into sharp black blades. That desperate yet powerful scream, the moment a warrior transcends pain to awaken his final hidden strength. Majin Buu spread his arms wide like a god of judgment standing at the end of days. Before his chest, a gigantic white-red energy sphere burned so brightly that it consumed the entire frame, nearly swallowing his body within its deadly radiance. Light from the sphere exploded outward in razor-sharp flashes, piercing through the dense storm clouds and casting a ghostly pale red glow over the ruins. Majin Buu stood motionless, arms spread wide as though preparing to unleash enough energy to erase everything that existed. A colossal stream of white-red energy tore through space like the wrath of the universe unleashed. It shot across the ruins at horrifying speed, dragging blazing red lightning around it like thunder dragons roaring through an apocalyptic storm. The ground below trembled beneath seas of dust and shattered debris. Burned skeletal structures leaned crookedly through the ash-filled haze like the remains of a dead civilization. Above, the heavy lead-gray sky was ripped apart by streaks of white light crashing downward, making the entire world feel as though Judgment Day had arrived. The destructive beam surged forward, light exploding outward, a power beyond human limits, crushing everything in its path. Violent and desperate, like the final moment before the entire world vanished inside blinding white light. Amid the storm-ravaged ruins of the city, Future Trunks gripped his sword tightly with both hands, straining with all his strength against the crimson-pink energy blast exploding directly against the blade. His face twisted with pain and determination, as though every ounce of strength left within him had been poured into this single moment. The collision between the energy beam and the sword erupted into a blinding explosion of light, scattering thousands of sparks and crimson particles across the sky. Glowing embers drifted around Trunks like the ashes of a collapsing world. Red neon light reflected across his faded denim jacket and tension-filled face. Behind him stood ruined skyscrapers fading into gray smoke beneath a crushing storm-filled sky. The sword sheath on his back gave him the appearance of the last wandering warrior still standing at the end of humanity. The atmosphere overflowed with energy and pressure. This was no longer merely a battle, it was the moment a single human being used sheer willpower to stop a force capable of destroying the world itself. A gigantic crimson-purple energy beam tore across the sky like an electric dragon roaring through the storm of the apocalypse. The young swordsman stood before the colossal explosion consuming the heavens behind him. He lowered his stance, gripping his sword tightly as though trying to hold the final line between life and annihilation. Behind him, the world erupted into a sea of violent white-red fire, hurling gigantic slabs of concrete and endless debris into the sky. The explosion illuminated the ruins with a ghostly and deadly radiance. On both sides stood shattered buildings reduced to blackened skeletal frames, leaning like tombstones. Thick smoke swirled into the heavy storm-gray sky, creating the feeling that the world itself was breaking apart before their eyes. The hopeless imbalance between humanity and the destructive force surrounding them was overwhelming. A lone warrior dared to confront the apocalypse with nothing but his will and the sword in his hands. Chaotic, tragic, and awe-inspiring, the light of the explosion felt both like the end of the world and the final remaining spark of hope within the ashes. Vegeta's face seemed to freeze time at the most horrifying moment imaginable. His eyes widened to their limit, trembling pupils reflecting the flames of the battle ahead, as though he had just witnessed something beyond all limits of power and fear. His skin was covered in ash, sweat, and countless tiny wounds glimmering beneath the burning orange-red sunset behind him. Every wrinkle on his forehead tightened violently, his face caught between fury, despair, and the instinct to survive. His upright hair swayed slightly in the scorching battlefield wind, making his entire face seem as though it were melting beneath unbearable pressure. The background behind him blurred into a sea of golden-orange light and ash-gray darkness. Vegeta's gaze contained the entire soul of the battle, a warrior standing before the moment that would decide the fate of the world. A brief silence amidst the storm of destruction, where a man faces his greatest fear before stepping into the final battle. Android 18 lunged forward like a living storm, both arms extended straight ahead, her palms blazing with brilliant pink-white energy so intense that it tore through the surrounding darkness. She screamed as emotion and power erupted from within her, her hair whipping wildly in the pressure winds generated by the surging energy. Her face tightened between rage and determination, her sharp eyes stripped completely of fear. Pink neon light reflected across her faded denim jacket and black and white striped sleeves. From her palms, bolts of electricity and particles of energy exploded into the air like flares during the apocalypse. That torrent of power surged forward, the moment a human being stops running and instead rises up, unleashing every last ounce of strength against the darkness consuming the world. Majin Buu stood motionless like the embodiment of absolute destruction. His smooth skin reflected the cold light of the storm-filled sky behind him, making him appear both grotesque and terrifying, like a biological weapon created solely for slaughter. His glowing red eyes narrowed with cruel rage, his cold stare locked onto its prey before delivering the killing blow. Thick white vapor poured from his nostrils and mouth like smoke from an overloaded reactor, as though the energy inside his body had heated beyond control. His round face and almost childlike features only made him more horrifying, a creature with an innocent, distorted appearance hiding enough power to crush the entire world. Steam continuously curled from before his face, like the silent growl of a monster preparing to descend into madness. From Majin Buu's mouth, a blinding white torrent of energy erupted violently like a volcano exploding, dragging smoke and shockwaves that crushed the air itself. Streaks of light shot across the sky like meteors piercing the dark heavens, making the entire frame tremble with the sensation of total annihilation. The monster's face twisted with limitless fury. White smoke billowed upward, hiding the lower half of his body. The blinding light of the explosion reflected across his slick skin, turning him into the center of a deadly storm. After the explosion, like divine wrath unleashed, a gigantic fireball burned violently, its orange-red light piercing through dense clouds of dust and transforming the battlefield into an apocalyptic vision painted in the colors of hell. At the center of it all floated a tiny figure in the sky. Massive clouds of smoke churned behind her, rising violently as though dozens of explosions had simultaneously consumed the earth itself. That small body remained motionless amid the chaos, as though absorbing the entire force of the explosion behind her. Chunks of concrete, steel, and ash spun wildly through the air around the figure suspended within the storm. Against the pitch-black sky, purple energy streaks slashed across the heavens like cracks in the apocalypse itself, filling the scene with terror. A lone human being amidst an ocean of ruins. Arms spread wide, hair whipping through the shockwaves. Only the screaming wind through shattered buildings, the sound of debris colliding in midair, and the terrifying silence before the next wave of destruction arrived. Gohan stood tall like humanity's final remaining hope. Behind him, the sky churned with dense black storm clouds, casting shadows over ruined skyscrapers and ash-covered streets. He clenched both fists tightly, veins bulging beneath battle-scarred muscles. His torn purple gi whipped violently in the invisible pressure exploding around his body. White electrical arcs crackled across his shoulders and circled his form like an awakened storm of energy. Gohan screamed across the battlefield, not merely a scream of power, but a scream of unyielding will. His eyes widened with fury, pain, and determination, as though he were pouring his very life force into one final counterattack. The silver-white aura surrounding him created sharp glowing outlines, making him appear like a war god emerging from legend. The city behind him may have collapsed, but the battle was not yet over. The ground split apart beneath the warrior's feet as a colossal surge of power erupted like a supernova within the ruined city. Blinding white light shot straight into the heavens, piercing the dense black clouds like a divine pillar connecting earth and sky. Gohan stood at the center of the explosion, both feet planted firmly into crumbling concrete, his entire body tense as his scream tore through space itself. Massive chunks of stone rose from the ground, floating around him as though gravity had vanished entirely. Wild white lightning slashed across the frame, striking ruined buildings, and shaking the entire battlefield violently. His torn battle clothes whipped violently beneath the pressure of the immense energy storm, revealing a body covered in wounds yet still overflowing with fighting spirit, a living monument of power and fury. Amid the blazing light and chaotic storm of flying debris, Gohan appeared like the embodiment of an awakened god of war, carrying enough power to shatter even the apocalyptic sky looming overhead. Goku stood silently like the final remnant of hope. His face was covered in dirt and wounds, his black hair swaying in the cold wind, carrying the scent of burning war. The sunset cast an orange glow over the shattered concrete ruins behind him, creating a grim contrast between destruction and lingering determination. His eyes no longer screamed with rage, but held a heavy calmness instead. Sweat rolled down his weathered face, each slow breath heavy like war drums before the final storm. A hero staring into the ashes of the world, preparing for the decisive battle that would determine the fate of everything. Goku dropped to one knee using every ounce of strength he had left. The pavement cracked beneath his hand, fragments of concrete trembling amid swirling gray smoke spreading through the ruins. Above him, dense black clouds covered the sky, casting shadows over burned-out buildings like the final chapter of a fallen civilization. Within the vast frame of destruction, his orange G stood out like the last spark refusing to die in the darkness of the apocalypse. Dust exploded violently around him, making it feel as though the earth itself had just been struck by a living meteor. Every movement was heavy but filled with determination, hands pressed against shattered stone, muscles trembling, eyes lowered as though gathering the final remnants of strength for a battle not yet finished. The sound of wind screaming through broken concrete skeletons, the sound of loose rubble rolling endlessly through the silence. Amid the ruined city buried beneath ash and collapsed buildings, Goku shot skyward like an arrow of light tearing through the storm-darkened heavens. From the shattered earth below, a brilliant white pillar of energy blasted upward into the sky, dragging dust, debris, and shockwaves powerful enough to make the entire world tremble. The sky was covered with rolling black clouds, heavy as if foretelling the end of the world. Yet amid those cold gray tones, the small figure in the orange martial arts, GI, stood as the sole beacon of hope, a living flame soaring upward into the heavens to confront destiny. A solitary point of light suspended within the vast emptiness, embodying a will that surpassed the limits of humanity. The glow from the energy stream reflected across the dense clouds, making the sky appear as though it were being torn in half by an invisible force. The moment the hero left the shattered earth behind him, carrying the last remaining faith of the world into the decisive battle above the apocalyptic sky, Vegeta clenched both fists tightly, veins bulging along his neck and temples, his roar tearing through the thick air filled with smoke, ash, and the remnants of war. His upright hair whipped violently in the wind, reflecting the cold orange glow of the burning sky behind him. His battle armor was covered in scratches, yet his eyes still burned with unyielding pride. Pure fury, ragged breaths, a tightly clenched jaw, and a scream compressed from every last fragment of his remaining will. Piccolo, his long antennae rising upward, stood motionless amid the ruined city. His eyes widened, his gaze filled with shock mixed with fear. The wrinkles across his pale green face were sharply carved by the cold light of the storm-filled sky, giving him an aged, merciless, and powerful appearance. Behind him, the decaying buildings vanished into dust and darkness. Black clouds swirled overhead like a furious ocean. His worn purple cloak fluttered lightly in the wind, as though sensing an even more terrifying power approaching. Amid the ruins of a dead city, future Trunks knelt on one knee atop the rubble like humanity's final survivor. The sky behind him was buried beneath layers of swirling black clouds, making it feel as though the entire world was holding its breath before the coming storm. His faded blue jacket moved gently in the cold wind, the strap of his sword crossing over his shoulder. His face hardened with silent determination, his eyes gazing into the distance, as though seeing something the others had not yet realized. One knee pressed against the shattered concrete, his hand gripping the cold hilt of his sword tightly while his gaze remained fixed on the storm-filled horizon. Behind him, the sky twisted into a colossal vortex of clouds, like a dimensional gate opening in the middle of the apocalypse. The spiraling clouds made it feel as though nature itself was being bent by a power beyond human understanding. His dark blue jacket was coated in ash and dust, his sword reflecting the pale light of the stormy sky. His face showed no fear, only the hardened resolve of someone who had witnessed too much loss to ever retreat again. Silent, cold, and suffocating, the moment a lone hero prepared to face the fate of the entire world. Beneath the gloomy sky, it felt like one rare moment of silence amid the apocalypse screaming behind him. Strands of pale purple hair drifted gently in the cold wind, falling across gray-blue eyes filled with astonishment mixed with determination. His skin was covered in ash and sweat, every scratch visible beneath the cold light of the storm-filled sky. It was the face of someone who had fought for far too long, who had lost far too much, yet still refused to fall. His eyes looked upward, reflecting the faint light within the raging heavens, as though somewhere above, the fate of the entire world had begun to move. Majin Buu stood towering like the embodiment of absolute destruction. His monstrous muscular body was covered in bulging veins beneath pale pink skin, while his glowing red eyes burned through the thick clouds of dust and smoke. Every movement carried a crushing weight, as though the ground itself could collapse beneath him. Broken slabs of concrete, twisted steel, and charred ruins surrounded him like proof of the power that had erased an entire civilization. The sky behind him drowned in cold ash-gray tones, pillars of smoke rising into the black clouds. Dim light pierced through the dust, making his figure resemble a monster emerging from ancient legend, cold, emotionless, and utterly merciless. Even his silence alone was enough to make the scene feel suffocating. This was no longer an ordinary battle, but the moment humanity faced a force born solely to annihilate everything that existed. Majin Buu's distorted face, crimson eyes blazing with murderous intent, veins and wrinkles twitching beneath skin that gleamed like living rubber. His teeth clenched tightly, sharp and twisted, radiating primal brutality moments before an eruption of rage. Behind him, ruined buildings vanished within swirling gray smoke beneath a pitch-black sky that resembled the arrival of doomsday. Cold light washed across his monstrous features, making every detail more horrifying, from his insane eyes to his warped frown filled with killing intent. Above the blackened sky of a city crushed by war, colossal clouds spiraled into a terrifying abyss like a gateway to the apocalypse. At the center of the storm, a tiny figure floated in midair, arms spread wide as though challenging both nature and fate itself. Below stretched an endless sea of destruction, shattered buildings, roads swallowed by ash, and the deathly silence of a collapsed civilization. White lightning ripped through the darkness, striking the ruined concrete below and creating a cold glow like the world's final heartbeat. The pitch-black heavens churned like the wrath of the apocalypse descending upon the ruined city. Massive clouds layered upon one another, thick and heavy like smoke from a war that had only just ended. A small figure floated in the sky, arms spread wide as though absorbing and commanding limitless power. From that body, blue-white lightning bolts tore through the darkness, stretching across the sky like gigantic electrical veins. The flashes illuminated the destruction below, collapsed buildings, scorched concrete, and ruined streets extending endlessly into the distance. The moment the protagonist awakened supreme power on the edge of the world's destruction, everything became grand, terrifying, and epic. The ruined city stretched beneath the rolling black sky, where dense storm clouds swirled like a warning of humanity's final day. Buildings leaned at impossible angles, concrete lay shattered, and scorched steel frames radiated a suffocating coldness. But amid that darkness, hundreds of blue lights suddenly ignited across the city. They floated like spirits, like fragments of living energy escaping from the earth itself. Some streaks of light shot upward like reverse meteors, leaving eerie trails through rain and smoke. The blue glow reflected across the ruins, making the entire city appear as though it were being consumed by a supernatural force beyond comprehension. The night sky opened like a colossal crack in the universe. Massive black clouds spiraled heavily across the heavens, leaving only a cold opening at the center, where an enormous blue energy pillar erupted straight upward into the sky. From the shattered earth below, millions of blue particles rose like liberated souls. They surged upward as twin waterfalls of light, merging at the center before shooting into the endless void above. Energy, memories, and fragments of countless lives were being drawn out of the physical world to become part of that colossal wave of light. The cold blue glow reflected across broken buildings, ash-covered streets, and scorched metal, creating a tragic beauty. Amid thick mist in the ruins of a city that had just endured the apocalypse, Gohan stood tall like the final symbol of hope. His torn purple gi was covered in ash and dust, his tense muscles and countless wounds showing that he had fought to his absolute limit. Yet those eyes, cold, focused, and filled with determination, still refused to surrender. His hands pressed together before his chest, where a blue energy sphere slowly formed. Light swirled violently within it like a star compressed by human will. The blue glow reflected across his stern face, the veins bulging along his arms, and through the cold gray mist of the battlefield behind him. At the moment the entire sky seemed to explode, Gohan roared within the center of the energy storm, his eyes blazing with the will to survive. Both hands gripped a violently trembling blue-white sphere of light, as though it contained the last remaining power of the world itself. Gigantic lightning bolts ripped across the heavens, coiling around his body like awakened dragons of electricity. Shockwaves from the erupting energy blasted apart the earth and concrete at his feet, lifting debris into the air. The city behind him became nothing more than a blurred silhouette within the blinding fury. Gohan's face twisted beneath the overwhelming pressure, not only from the power, but from rage, despair, and the determination to protect what little remained. His torn gi whipped violently in the storm of energy, every muscle taut beneath the cold blue lightning like heated steel. Thunder roared together, with the deep explosions coming from the sphere of light. Everything was engulfed in blazing blue-white brilliance. In that instant, the entire world seemed split apart by a thunderous roar within the storm. Gohan lunged forward, both hands locked into the stance of his final attack, and from his palms, a colossal blue-white beam of energy erupted through the darkness. The blinding light consumed everything ahead, so intense that the entire scene transformed into a sea of raging electricity. Massive lightning bolts tore across the heavens as though reacting to a force beyond nature itself. The earth trembled. Rubble, concrete, and twisted metal were blasted into the air, swirling around Gohan as if gravity had ceased to exist. His face twisted in a furious scream, his eyes filled with rage and unwavering determination. His torn gi whipped violently in the shockwaves while his body tensed as though pouring his entire life force into the attack. Behind him lay a ruined city drowned in smoke and cold blue light, a witness to the final battle between destruction and hope. The deep explosions merged with the sound of thunder tearing through the heavens and the suffocating pressure of the storm. The colossal energy beam surged forward like a divine comet. Amid the rolling black clouds of the apocalyptic sky, Goku floated in midair, so small he seemed almost swallowed by the endless darkness. Yet above him burned a colossal celestial sphere of energy, a radiant blue-white orb shining like a second sun born in the heart of the storm. The light from the massive energy sphere poured across the entire scene, transforming the black clouds into a silver ocean of rolling waves. Rubble and fragments floated around him as though gravity itself had vanished before a force beyond natural law. Both arms were raised toward the sky, his body straining as he summoned a power capable of changing the fate of the entire world. Thunder roared and shockwaves shook the very air. The blinding blue-white light transformed the sky into a cathedral of power, where this moment was no longer simply battle, but the judgment of the universe itself. Vegeta's upright hair whipped wildly in the storm winds, his face covered in ash and wounds that had not yet dried. The cold light from the stormy heavens illuminated every sharp feature, emphasizing eyes filled with pride mixed with exhaustion. Behind him, black clouds churned like a furious ocean, yet the expression on his face was not entirely hopeless. The corner of his mouth lifted slightly, a faint smile from someone who had survived hell, or from a warrior who had finally realized the battle was not yet over. His blue and white armor was heavily scratched, covered in dirt and battle scars. Cracks across the armor and dried blood along his neck and cheekbones gave him a rugged, realistic, and tragic beauty. Only the heavy silence after the storm remained. Yet that silence carried more emotional weight than any battle, as though Vegeta stood on the boundary between hope and ultimate sacrifice. The night sky was torn apart by a colossal celestial sphere of energy suspended among the swirling storm clouds. It resembled an artificial sun newly awakened, blazing with blue-white power so violent it shook the atmosphere itself. Directly beneath that overwhelming mass of power, Goku raised both arms as though bearing the weight of the entire universe. From the energy sphere, gigantic lightning bolts shot across the heavens, twisting like ancient dragons of electricity roaring within the storm. Rubble and fragments of destruction spiraled through the air, as though gravity itself had been completely distorted. Thunder cracked across the sky. A cold blue light engulfed the heavens. Majin Buu's glowing red eyes burned through the dust and smoke, staring forward with absolute cruelty, not anger, not haste, but the terrifying calm of a being who knows he stands above all life. His distorted face twisted with grotesque features. Around him lay shattered concrete, twisted steel, and collapsed buildings beneath a dark gray sky. Thin smoke crawled across the ground like the breath of a battlefield after the apocalypse. But the most horrifying thing was the silence. No more explosions, no more screams, only him standing amid the ruins like the king of destruction. A being that radiated absolute coldness and unstoppable power, like the living embodiment of the end of the world. A colossal sphere of energy hung suspended like the glowing heart of the apocalypse. It swirled with violent blue-white light, chaotic streams of energy crashing inside it like a star on the verge of exploding. Massive bolts of lightning erupted from the sphere, tearing through the night and illuminating the black clouds with icy flashes. Compared to the gigantic energy sphere above, Goku's body was nothing more than a fragile speck of light within the raging universe. Broken rocks and fragments of meteorites spiraled around the sphere, as if drawn into an invisible gravitational field. The air itself seemed warped by the overwhelming energy, causing the sky to tremble beneath thunder and electric light. Majin Buu remained motionless like a god of destruction risen from ashes. Every muscle in his body stayed tense with a power so immense it made the surrounding air feel suffocatingly heavy. He did not need to move or roar, his mere presence alone made the scene terrifying. White smoke rose from smoldering piles of concrete, curling around his feet. The cold light from the sky reflected off his pale pink skin, emphasizing an appearance both monstrous and horrifying. Future Trunks stood still like a storm moments before it unleashed itself. His pale purple hair swayed in the cold wind, carrying ash and the stench of burning metal. The long sword reflected the dim light of the stormy sky, sharp as an unspoken judgment. Behind him, ruined buildings leaned beneath curtains of gray smoke. Black clouds churned overhead, heavy and violent. The warrior's gaze did not waver. It was not merely the look of a man preparing to fight, but the eyes of someone who had lost too much to still understand fear. One hand gripped the hilt of his sword tightly, while the other hung loosely at his side, calm, yet filled with killing intent. Both of Trunks' hands clenched before his chest, where a massive blue energy blazed violently like the core of a newly awakened star. Lightning wrapped around his body like dragons of light, tearing through the freezing air. The blue glow reflected off his cold face and steel-sharp eyes, creating a terrifying presence. At that moment, he resembled a living weapon born from war and despair. It felt as though time itself had stopped before destruction erupted, and amid that apocalypse, the only remaining light was the flame of battle burning within the young warrior's eyes. Trunks roared as though he intended to tear apart the heavens themselves. His feet dug into the shattered ground, his body tensed against the overwhelming power exploding from his palms. From before him, a colossal blue-white beam of energy blasted into the darkness, shining like the lightning of gods. Wild bolts of electricity wove across the sky, lashing through the ruined buildings. The atmosphere shook violently. Broken stones and ash spiraled around him, suspended within the crushing pressure of the unleashed power. The sword on his back trembled faintly within the sea of light, as if it too could sense the life or death battle unfolding. Trunks' face twisted under the strain, yet his eyes still burned with unbreakable resolve, the gaze of someone willing to sacrifice everything to protect what little remained of this world. This was no longer a mere attack. It was the final scream of hope amid humanity's ashes. The blue-white sphere of energy shone so intensely that it devoured every surrounding detail, transforming the entire world into a blinding ocean of light. Massive bolts of lightning tore across the sky like the claws of gods, while hundreds of rocks and ruins were pulled into the air, spinning within an invisible seismic storm. Black clouds spiraled around the energy mass like a gateway to the apocalypse opening before the world. At the center of it all, that power felt beyond human control, breathtakingly beautiful, yet terrifying like the birth of destruction itself. Cold light poured down upon the world below, making the sky resemble the final moment before everything was burned away. The sphere descended with wind-shattering speed, hope and annihilation colliding with enough force to shake the universe itself. Blue-white light erupted like a supernova, consuming the entire scene in violent, chaotic energy. Amid the storm of crackling electricity, Majin Buu's eyes widened in terror, his distorted face twisted by the unbearable pressure crushing his body from within. Streams of blue energy coiled around him like electric chains, causing the air to tremble as blinding flashes exploded outward. His pale skin reflected the freezing light, making him appear horrifying, as though he stood at the boundary between destruction and total erasure. Smoke, dust, and darkness merged together. It was the moment when uncontrollable power tore space itself apart, while the villain's desperate screams echoed through the raging sea of energy. At the center of the shockwave, Majin Buu's red eyes were stretched wide in horror, his mouth screaming as he was consumed by a power beyond his ability to endure. Beams of light pierced through his body like blades of energy, burning with violent chaos. His pale flesh reflected the icy glow, while the darkness behind him was crushed beneath the expanding halo of blinding light. The surrounding air trembled, filled with mist and the remnants of a brutal battle. It was the final moment before a being was completely swallowed by an energy he could no longer control. A colossal explosion erupted across the sky like the wrath of the apocalypse. A blazing orange fireball surged upward into enormous mushroom clouds, layers upon layers of smoke twisting together like monsters awakening within a sea of flames. Light from the heart of the explosion pierced the night, staining the world with burning gold and violently trembling heat waves. Torrents of scorching air spiraled into the sky, dragging ash and sparks in every direction, making it feel as though the heavens themselves were being incinerated. The destructive power had reached its absolute peak, and nothing remained except the roaring of fire, smoke, and pressure-crushing space itself. It was the final moment of a battle beyond human limits, where life and destruction merged into one colossal sea of flames. From the silent emptiness beyond orbit, Earth appeared fragile amid the endless sea of stars. Yet at the center of the blue planet, a gigantic mushroom cloud rose into the atmosphere. The massive white-gray cloud twisted violently upward, piercing through the atmosphere like a colossal scar carved across the planet's surface. A perfect circular shockwave spread outward, crushing the cloud layers below as though the entire atmosphere trembled beneath a power beyond imagination. The final explosion had ended. Amid the devastation, the Earth had been torn open into a gigantic crater. Thick white smoke rose upward like the dying breath of a wounded planet. Burned cliffs stood around the abyss, covered in ash and ruins, creating the feeling that this place had just suffered an irreversible apocalypse. The sky above hung heavy with swirling black clouds. Cold light slipped through the cracks in the storm, reflecting into the abyss still radiating heat. In the distance, the remnants of civilization remained only as distorted shadows behind fog and smoke. Ash gray and icy black tones created a silence more terrifying than the explosions themselves. The horrifying scale of destruction that had just unfolded felt as though the world had been crushed in a single instant by a power beyond imagination. Majin Buu, the final villain, had finally been defeated.